Nobody. I like each. I don't know why they never voted to now.
Yeah, okay, so what we'll have at the Auburn stabilization meeting on the second. And we'll have, you know, the map that shows where it is up and where it is down.
So many issues are involved right here. And what is maybe not even sure. I'd like to see it just. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we can.
No, I'm saying I know. Never gonna make sense to move out to that.
Right. Remember that.
Oh, I've got. Water cable doesn't go down. One thing. Right. The second is. Well, anyway. I know a lot of resource for it. You can justify that their numbers are right and their hours are wrong, then we'll all sit down.
Okay. Yeah, ready.
Ready?
Okay, we will call to order the work session of Water Board meeting number 8-24 being held in Soda Springs, Idaho, and streamed on YouTube. We'd like to welcome one and all here today. First order of business is roll call. Jennifer, please.
Okay, Mr. Barker,
Here.
Ms. Cole-Hansen. Here. Mr. Gibbs,
Here.
Mr. McMahon,
On Zoom.
Mr. Olmstead,
Here.
Mr. Stevenson,
Here.
Mr. Van Stone,
Here.
and Chairman Raybould.
Here. Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer. The next item, Mr. Patton, is the Nez Perce presentation.
Yes, the Nez Perce tribe had requested to provide a presentation to the Water Resource Board regarding minimum stream flow water rights within the area within and surrounding the Nez Perce Reservation. I believe they will be on presenting by Zoom. I think Allison on Zoom will be making the presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and Director of Water Resources. I'm just going to share my screen.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here. So I can't see what you see, but do you see my presentation?
Yes, we do.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'm an employee of the Nez Perce Tribe's Water Resources Division, and I am here today representing the tribe as a sovereign government. At the tribe's Water Resources Division, I act as program lead for the tribe's Water Rights Administration program. Our program administers the 50,000 acre feet that was decreed in the Snake River Basin Adjudication, or SRBA, for the tribe's multiple purpose uses. We also monitor in-stream flows decreed during the SRBA, and we co-manage surface water and groundwater resources within the Nez Perce Reservation in northern Idaho. I appreciate the time to speak today, and I look forward to further engagement with the board and the department on the important issues I am here to raise. In today's presentation, I'd like to share a brief history of the Nez Perce tribe, the importance of flowing and functional streams to the Nez Perce way of life, the minimum stream flows the tribe negotiated during the SRBA, and the tribe's concerns regarding unmet SRBA minimum stream flows and the impact these unmet minimum stream flows are having on co-managed aquatic resources, the tribe's treaty rights, and the traditional Nez Perce way of life. The Nez Perce historically hunted, fished, gathered, pastured, and traveled on land that totaled between 13 and 15 million acres, which is shown on the slide in the large oval. While the areas in the large oval were predominantly used, there are many stories and documentation of Nez Perce traveling outside of their Aboriginal territory. The Nez Perce traveled as far east as Missouri and as far west as the Pacific Ocean. The Nez Perce way of life revolved around the land. Nez Perce see themselves as a part of the land and the land as a part of them. Unlike homesteaders, the Nez Perce did not live in just one area. Instead, they moved across the landscape each year, following anadromous runs of fish in the spring, seasonal vegetation in the summer, game animals and anadromous runs of fish in the fall, and finally, they wintered along the river systems. The Nez Perce way of life has persisted for thousands of years. In fact, the oldest human site within the United States that we know of is a 16,500-year-old Nez Perce site in Idaho. With the arrival of Euro-Americans, Nez Perce ancestors sought to preserve their way of life for future generations. With the 1855 treaty, the Nez Perce exchanged land for guaranteed rights to hunt, gather, pasture, and travel within their Aboriginal territory, and also to fish at all usual and accustomed places. Only 8 years after signing this treaty, Euro-Americans found gold on lands that the tribe reserved in its 1855 treaty. And as a result, in 1863, the United States pressured the Nez Perce to further reduce the reservation to the area shown in white in this slide. The Nez Perce identity, culture, spirituality, and way of life are all tied to the land in an ancient annual cycle of hunting, fishing, gathering, and pasturing their animals. The values that sustain and drive Nez Perce society and culture today are the same values that were important when the treaties were negotiated and the same values that were important before Euro-Americans reached North America. The Nez Perce still exercise the tribe's sovereign, treaty-reserved rights to hunt, fish, gather, pasture, and travel. On this slide, this is a picture of my coworker's husband teaching their daughter how to catch fish in a stream that his family has fished for generations. With each treaty with the United States, the Nez Perce sought to protect these traditions as a way of life. The tribe's Water Resources Division and Fisheries Department worked together to manage, protect, and restore the tribe's treaty-reserved fisheries and their habitats to healthy conditions to support this Nez Perce traditional way of life. And as noted by Chairman Wheeler on this slide, the Nez Perce have been fighting to protect their way of life for nearly 170 years now. During the SRBA, water users filed claims to ensure that their uses of water were protected and that they could preserve their livelihoods. As the oldest water user in the basin, the tribe did the same. The tribe filed 3 types of water use claims. First, multi-purpose water uses within the 1863 reservation. Second, springs outside of the reservation as expressly reserved in the 1863 treaty. And finally, in-stream flows at critical locations needed to fulfill the purposes of the 1855 treaty-reserved fishing right. With the in-stream flow claims, the Nez Perce sought to protect all components of the ecosystem that was necessary to support healthy, viable fisheries to support their sovereign treaty-reserved right to fish. The tribe negotiated in the SRBA settlement in-stream flows for more than 200 streams of biological and cultural importance to the Nez Perce in order to protect aquatic species and treaty-reserved rights. While the settlement provided that the in-stream flow rights would be held by the Idaho Water Resources Board, the Idaho Department of Water Resources, or IDWR, regulates the delivery of in-stream flow water rights. The in-stream flows agreed to in the SRBA settlement permit existing water uses and provide water for future domestic, commercial, municipal, and industrial development for non-tribal members. In the SRBA B-list streams, which are shown in this slide in light blue, The settlement parties were acutely aware that water uses had already been fully developed and aquatic habitat was severely impaired. In contrast, the A-list minimum flows, shown in dark blue, were established in streams where land ownership and remote location made future development and additional water use more unlikely. The intent of the SRBA was to bring the parties together to implement specific measures to improve habitat conditions in the SRBA B-list streams by, for example, limiting future diversions, sharing data, and securing non-use of senior water rights in the water supply bank. The SRBA B-list streams were intended to be a roadmap for developing solutions. I'm here before you today with the hope of restarting that conversation among the parties regarding solutions. The Tribe's Water Resources Division is interested in engaging with you in further discussions regarding protecting and maintaining the SRBA in-stream flows that are shown on this map. Although there are SRBA in-stream flows throughout the Clearwater and Salmon River basins, and the tribe actively co-manages its treaty reserved resources throughout its Aboriginal territory, for today's presentation, I'd like to only focus on the minimum flow streams that are within or flow into the 1863 reservation. These streams are shown in blue on this map. I'm focusing on these streams today because these are the areas the tribe holds water rights for its own uses. This is the area for which the tribe's Water Resources Division has the most data. And finally, most of these streams provide habitat for Treaty Reserved and Endangered Species Act listed fish. So within or flowing into the reservation, there are 6 minimum stream flows on 4 major rivers, 10 relatively undeveloped SRBA A-list streams, undeveloped as of 2004, and 28 fully developed, again as of 2004, SRBA B-list streams with impaired aquatic habitat. There are 11 streamflow monitoring gauges operated by the U.S. Geological Survey that can be used to determine if minimum stream flows are being met. Also, the tribe's Water Resources Division operates 12 base flow gauges during July through November, which is shown in the purple crosses. 4 of these sites shown in the purple crosses were also monitored by the tribe in 2019 as part of a pilot study. Although it might look on this map like the tribe's Water Resources Division's purple base flow gauges overlapped with the USGS gauges, they do not. We place our gauges at the mouth of incoming tributaries. For example, if you look at Lawyer Creek and 7 Mile Creek, which in some instances may be close to established USGS gauges. We don't duplicate USGS monitoring efforts. Finally, Water Resources Division has conducted periodic year-round monitoring on another 13 minimum flow streams, and these are represented on the map by the green crosses. Between all of these sources, we have data for 80% of the minimum stream flow reaches within the reservation, and I'd like to share those data with you today. So this map shows the percentage of days between July and October that we have data for in which the minimum streamflow water right is not being met. I focused on minimum stream flows during the months of July through October because this is the most critical time period for ESA listed steelhead. And because this period overlaps with the driest part of the year precipitation-wise, and therefore the time of year with the greatest irrigation need, stream flows are the most impacted by water withdrawals. Additionally, this time of the year is where we see higher water temperatures due to decreased stream flows and lack of snow melt runoff. The map's colors represent decreasing frequency or severity. So red would mean the minimum stream flow is unmet almost all of the time between July through October. On the other hand, yellow means that the minimum stream flow is met about 30 to 60% of the time between July and October. I'd like you to note that all the minimum flow streams that we have data summarized for are not meeting minimum stream flows at least some of the time. And if the stream is shown in blue, that means that I have not yet been able to summarize the data, but I plan to. I'd like to point out in particular the Potlatch River, which Idaho Department of Fish and Game presented their concerns to you a few months ago. The Potlatch is an SRBA B-list stream that does not meet minimum stream flows 98% of the days between July and October. However, new irrigation water rights continue to be processed in this basin. Same thing with Lapway and Big Canyon Creek. In these systems, minimum stream flows are not being met 93 and 99% of the time between July and October, respectively. These are all SRBA B-list streams that were determined to be fully developed with impaired aquatic habitat in the mediator's term sheet 20 years ago. However, new irrigation water rights continue to be processed. The tribe finds this extremely concerning. In this map, I wanted to show on the days between July through October, where minimum stream flows are not being met, how much below the minimum stream flow actual flows are. Again, the map's colors indicate decreasing severity. So streams shown in red are between 71 and 93% below decreed minimum stream flows. And on the other hand, streams that are shown in yellow are between 7 to 39% below decreed minimum stream flows. I look at this map one of two ways. So first, streams shown in yellow are areas that might most benefit from junior curtailment or water supply banking agreements because there's a small difference between decreed and actual flows. These are areas that might be low-hanging fruit, if you will. Or two, streams that are shown in red are areas with the greatest need for flow augmentation or curtailing new water uses. And again, I want to draw your attention to Lapway Creek and the Potlatch River. These are both, again, SRBA B-list streams that were considered fully developed with impaired aquatic habitat 20 years ago. These pictures of the Potlatch River vividly represent the current status. And again, this is an SRBA B-list stream. And again, a couple months ago, IDF&G presented to you its concerns regarding insufficient flows in the Potlatch River, which serves as ESA-listed steelhead habitat. The intent of the SRBA in-stream flow component was to ensure that water remains in the streams from the headwaters all the way to the mouth to provide year-round habitat sufficient for treaty-reserved aquatic resources. This current state of the Potlatch River does not represent quality habitat, nor does it provide fishing opportunities for the Nez Perce traditional way of life. The tribe's fisheries department, a co-manager with IDF&G, is very concerned about ensuring sufficient flows and habitat for healthy, harvestable fish populations in SRBA minimum flow streams like the Potlatch River. Because of these concerns by the tribe's Water Resources Division and its Fisheries Department, the tribe has been active with other concerned stakeholders in protesting new applications for permit. Some of these new applications were in waters that flow into the Potlatch River. I often hear from the applicants that they just want a small amount of water for their garden. And I have to, unfortunately, explain to them that the reality is there is not sufficient water to meet senior minimum stream flows, let alone junior users' water needs, no matter how small they are. These next images are from Lapway Creek, again another SRBA B-list stream. The top left image shows a pool of water that's been disconnected from the rest of the stream. For reference, Lapway Creek is a relatively large watershed with a drainage area of approximately 270 square miles and with 7 perennial minimum stream flow tributaries. There are other tributaries to Lapway Creek, but of those tributaries, 7 of them are SRBA B-list streams. Furthermore, the tribe's fisheries department recognizes Lapway as a priority subbasin to restore fishery populations to healthy and harvestable levels, and the fisheries department has invested heavily in restoration efforts. The two bottom images show what happens when fish get trapped in disconnected pools and those pools dry up. Unfortunately, there are casualties. including ESA listed steelhead. Luckily, during the event that was documented on this slide, the tribe's fisheries department was able to salvage some of these fish from pools. But again, the intent of the SRBA minimum stream flows was to ensure a thriving fishery to support traditional ways of life. These are images of Wed Creek, an SRBA minimum flow stream that is tributary to Lapway Creek. The left and right images show the difference 1 CFS makes to the amount of stream flow and available habitat for aquatic species. So as you can see, any flow augmentation would be helpful here. Because of this, I am eager to discuss with IDWR and the board flow augmentation strategies such as junior curtailment, water supply banking, or other strategies, as was contemplated in the SRBA agreement for B-list streams. As parties to the SRBA settlement, the tribe's Water Resources Division is interested in working cooperatively to address unmet SRBA minimum stream flows. And as I mentioned earlier, the tribe has been active in protesting new applications in areas where we believe the water is not available to meet senior minimum stream flows needs, let alone provide for new uses of water. Although the SRBA minimum stream flow water rights are held by the board and regulated by IDWR, the tribe has a vested interest in free-flowing and functional stream systems. This is why the tribe advocated so strongly for SRBA and stream flows 2 decades ago. Protesting new applications is an uncomfortable, labor and data-intensive process, but necessary as new water uses are processed. The tribe would like to see a holistic and collaborative solution to meet SRBA minimum stream flows, which in turn will promote viable fisheries and allow opportunities for the Nez Perce traditional way of life. So to summarize, our analyses of long-term data show that many SRBA minimum stream flows are unmet for 9 to 10 months of the year and have been unmet for decades. This is especially true for the fully developed SRBA B-list streams. While our focus today was on reservation, our goal is to ensure that SRBA minimum stream flows are met throughout the Clearwater and Salmon River basins. I've shared with you our concerns today, not to cast blame or point fingers, but to remind us all that the SRBA settlement was intended to protect streams from over-allocation and promote cooperative co-management among the parties. We believe only by coming together can we find and implement solutions to honor the intent of the agreement between parties. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and Director of Water Resources for taking the time to meet today. I'm happy to answer any questions regarding our concerns related to minimum stream flow water rights, and I look forward to scheduling a follow-up meeting in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, board members. Any questions? Brian,
Mr. Chairman, sorry, I didn't hear the name. I can't read it here.
Allison.
Allison. Brian on the Water Resource Board. These new applications, are they mostly domestic groundwater applications, or are there actually stream flow diversions? Are these small streams? Do they have conjunctive management on them, or are all the? In other words, are all the new domestic applications have no mitigation responsibilities?
Mr. Chairman, most of these applications might have a small domestic or stock water use from a surface water diversion, but there are also non-subordinated irrigation uses attached to them. And I believe conjunctive management of groundwater and surface water resources is not an idea that has yet reached the northern region of IDWR.
Thank you.
Al.
Chairman Allison, how successful have your protests been?
Mr. Chairman, I would say that we have been relatively successful in protesting. Some of the applicants, upon being educated, have actually withdrawn their applications whereas in other cases, we have worked with the applicant to condition their applications, but protesting is a very intensive process for the applicant, IDWR staff, and the tribe staff. I don't think it's a sustainable way to address our concerns.
Okay, I'm gonna ask the director, once the adjudication's complete, do you envision that you'll have administration on these waterways of concern?
Mr. Chairman, as far as I know, the SRBA adjudication is complete in all of those drainages. And I do have a statutory obligation to create water districts in all adjudicated basins. The department's resources right now are quite insufficient to create water districts in all of the basins where water districts are statutorily required. And so we operate on a prioritized basis where the greatest need gets the most attention. And we haven't put a lot of effort into creating water districts up there because there hasn't been a lot of outreach from water users looking for that type of administration. Earlier this spring, I was in the headwaters of Potlatch, River Basin. And for the first time, at least to my knowledge, I was hearing from the water users their interest in having a water district in that basin because they're contemplating raising a reservoir there and they want to ensure that that additional storage water gets to the places that it would be intended. And I'm aware of several other areas in northern Idaho where there is interest in creating water districts. So I think it is coming, but it is not something that we're currently focused on.
All right, Allison, if I could ask a question, have you audited, say on the Potlatch, how many diversions that are junior to the minimum stream flow water right there are, and how many CFS are being diverted that should be curtailed to meet the minimum stream flow? Do you have, I mean, is it a handful or is it many, or do you know?
Mr. Chairman, on the Potlatch, which is different from other minimum stream flows, we found that it's different on a case-by-case basis, but on the Potlatch, there's relatively few new water rights. However, there are definitely new irrigation water rights, and another potential concern on the Potlatch is there's a lot of in-stream reservoirs that we're not sure how those are accounted for in the minimum stream flow accounting.
Okay, and I just used the Potlatch as an example. I just wondered if you had any idea how many of these junior water rights are diverting that are impacting the minimum stream flow. So appreciate that. Okay, board members, any other questions? Oh, okay. Mr. Hill, did you have some comments?
I'll just emphasize that, you know, with these new water rights, we probably average 2 to 3 water rights a month in the basin. And it is a time-consuming process to review these water rights and then set up a meeting and meet with the potential applicants, negotiate or not negotiate. And it is a consuming process.
I understand that in my own area as well. We deal with it all the time. It sounds like it's something that the director's aware of. The director is working towards getting water districts in place. It's one of those things where we have to work with the legislature and the governor to secure funding and implement. And we're aware of your situation to the degree that the water board can help. I think we are partnering to solve some of the problems on Lapway Creek. if I understand correctly. So, we are interested in making sure that the minimum stream flows are protected. Okay, anything else, board? Brian?
Mr. Chairman, Allison or Bobby, so following up on what Jeff said about our Lapway Creek, project with Lewiston Orchards and you guys have supported also. Do you think that will, with that diversion discontinued, meet the minimum flows on Lapway Creek at the compliance point? And do you think there's other of these tributary streams that might be able to have some kind of a similar project? I know they're real expensive, but you think taking water from the main stem and moving it up into the tributaries could preserve the fish in other areas?
Yeah, the Lewiston Orchards project will definitely help in meeting those minimum stream flows, both in Sweetwater and Lapway Creek. That one's very unique because it's going to provide a large amount of water, where the streams like Potlatch, Bedrock, other tributaries to the lower Clearwater, those are kind of more, I'd say death by 1,000 cuts, because it's stock water rights, it's domestic rights, and trying to find a single project to help meet the minimum flows is a bit of a challenge. It's going to take multiple projects in these smaller tribs to try to get, say, to 1 CFS or 2 CFS. But that 1 or 2 CFS that we can get in these smaller tribs is, up to 50% of that stream flow in the summertime.
Cole-Hansen.
Bobby, do you feel that the Lewiston Orchards project would also help with Webb Creek? Do you see an impact on Webb Creek?
Correct. Webb Creek's part of the of the LOP system. So you have Webb Creek, Sweetwater Creek, and then Lapway Creek that the LOP will help solve.
We look forward to engaging with department staff and members of the board staff to come up with solutions on a case-by-case basis for some of these other systems.
Okay, well, we appreciate the update and the information you provided, and please keep us aware of how we're doing up there. Everybody else in the state seems to point out what the board ought to be doing and when they ought to be doing it. So you're welcome to do the same. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate the time today.
Yep. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Bear River Basin 101.
Yeah, we'll move into our program on the Bear River Basin, and Matt Anders with our staff will lead off with Bear River Basin 101. I think that since the last time Matt has presented to you, he has received a promotion.
Yeah, that's important.
His title is now Technical Services Bureau Chief. So
Wow. We salute.
thank you. In addition to that, Matt has most recently been the chair of the Bear River Basin Compact Commission Technical Advisory Committee. So he is very well equipped to provide the Bear River Basin 101 presentation.
Yeah, and we appreciate Matt, man. We've been working with Matt on Bear River Basin issues now for several years. And thank you very much, Matt. Okay, we just the teeniest little bit of a technical problem here. I think we're ready to go. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as stated, my name is Matt Anders. I'm going to talk to you today about start out with giving you the basics of the Bear River Basin. We have several talks coming here that are going to give you more detail, but I'm going to try to set the foundation for the Bear River Basin. So on the right here, I have a figure of the Bear River Basin. These dashed lines here that you see, these are state boundaries with Idaho here, Utah, and Wyoming. The blue lines that you see on this figure are rivers, with the thickest blue line is the main stem of the Bear River, and then blue polygons are either lakes or reservoirs. So the Bear River Basin, or the Bear River starts down here in the Uinta Mountains of Utah. It flows north into Wyoming, back into Utah, back into Wyoming, crosses into Idaho, and continues north to Soda Springs. At Soda Springs, it turns and starts flowing south through Idaho, back into Utah, and then discharges into the Great Salt Lake in this area right here. During its length from the Uinta Mountains down to the Great Salt Lake, it flows about 350 miles. The U-shaped nature of the basin creates kind of a unique situation where the headwaters are actually only about 90 miles as the crow flies from the mouth at the Great Salt Lake. And it crosses 5 state boundaries, or state boundaries 5 times during its run. It is the largest tributary of the Great Salt Lake, with the struggles that Utah is having with Great Salt Lake, keeping the water levels up. There is some focus on the Bear and what can be done in the Bear to get more water down to the Salt Lake. So we are watching as that progresses. And then a bit of trivia here at the end. This is the largest river in North America that does not flow to the ocean. Here is a figure on the right of the Bear River, the annual volume in the river. On the left, I have the volume in acre feet. On the bottom, I have stream gauges, excuse me, starting with the upstream end, the Utah-Wyoming border, then the Wyoming-Idaho border, the Idaho-Utah border, and then the Corinne gauge, which is just above Great Salt Lake. So what we see when we just look at this generally is we see a gaining stream that's gaining water the entire length that it's flowing. If we look at these blue bars here, these are the average discharge at these gauges for the 2000 to 2023 time frame. You know, at the upper end, we're at 130,000 acre feet. It's to 230 by the time you get to the Wyoming-Idaho border, 480 by the time we get to Idaho, Utah, and then 800 by the time we get to Great Salt Lake. So on average, the Bear River discharge is about 800,000 acre feet to Great Salt Lake. But we also see a lot of variability between wet and dry. So the orange bar here that I have are the same gauges, and I put 2004 on there as a representative of a dry year, and in green 2017 as a wet year. So if we just take, for example, the Idaho-Utah border gauge. In a dry year, it'll get about 260,000 acre feet of flow, but in a wet year, it'll go up to about 860. So that's a 600,000 foot acre foot difference between a wet and a dry year. That's a significant amount of variability. So here we're back at my original figure. We have 2 types of reservoirs in the Bear River Basin. The first one is storage reservoirs. These are reservoirs that are storing water primarily for irrigation. The 3 largest are Sulphur Creek, they're both like this. Oh, there we go. Oh, got it. Sorry, everybody. Sulphur Creek down here at the bottom, Woodruff Narrows, both in Wyoming, and then Bear Lake. Bear Lake is by far the largest reservoir in the basin at 1.4 million acre feet. Sorry, I just noticed this morning I have the numbers wrong on Woodruff Narrows and Sulphur Creek. Woodruff Narrows is 55,000. Sulphur Creek is about 15,000. But those are the 3 biggest reservoirs for storage. There's several other small reservoirs, but they're all less than about 15,000 acres. Pacific Corps also operates reservoirs in the basin for hydropower. We have Soda Springs up here. They're denoted by the stars, Grace, Oneida, and Cullen. Those reservoirs generate power through power plants that kind of range from about 14 to 33 megawatts. There are a couple of small other hydropower plants on diversions, but they're relatively small. So here on the right, I have a figure of the north end of Great Salt Lake, or, the north end of Bear Lake. So this is Bear Lake here. And this is Bear River over here. So currently, the Bear River is not connected to Bear Lake. Over the last maybe 20,000 years, there have been periods when Bear River does run into Bear Lake, and then periods when it does not. Currently, it's not connected to Bear Lake. So Bear Lake is operated as an off-stream reservoir. So Bear River is meandering in here from the southeast. It gets to Stewart Dam, and all the water is diverted out of the Bear River into a series of canals and other infrastructure to get it to the lake and then back out of it. Conley Baldwin will be talking here in a couple of presentations, and he's going to go through this and kind of explain the operations that Pacific Core uses to move the water. And later this afternoon, for the people that are going on the field trip, we're going to visit some of these locations and talk more. But the infrastructure that we're talking about and seeing here is all because Bear River does not flow into the lake. This is a figure of Bear Lake water levels through time. On the left here, I have elevation above mean sea level. On the bottom, I have years from 1915 to 2015. This green line here is the maximum full pool for Bear Lake, which is an elevation of 5923.65. And the red line is the empty pool at 5902. So this blue line here is Bear Lake elevation through time, 1916 to 2014. What we see in this record is extended periods of wet and dry conditions. So early in the 1900s, we see several years where the lake is relatively full, there are wet conditions, plenty of water. Then we get into the 30s here, where there's extended drought in the Bear River Basin. Elsewhere in America, there was the Dust Bowl, but here we just see lower lake levels. From about the 40s to the 80s, we had many years where the lake was nearly full, wet conditions. Since the 80s, we had two multi-year droughts here in the late 80s, early 90s, and then again in the 2000s, broken up by this 3 years of wet conditions. So the distance between, the volume between the green and the red lines of the active storage of Bear Lake. That's 1.4 million acre feet. Don Barnett will talk about this later, but the maximum storage allocation in any year is 245,000 out of Bear Lake. So with a small storage allocation relative to the large capacity or the active space in the reservoir, this is a multi-year storage facility. It can still supply water through multi-year droughts, as we see in the early 2000s. There is a limit. If it gets below 5904, there is no storage allocation. Now, switching to water rights administration, the Bear River is administered in 3 distinct separate areas. So the first one is called the Upper Division. It's from the headwaters to Pixley Dam in Wyoming. It's kind of bluish purple. The Central Division is from Pixley Dam down to Stewart Dam in yellow. And then the lower division is from Stewart Dam all the way down to Great Salt Lake. When I say these are separate administration, that means if you have a water right, say in this area here in the Grace area, if you make a water call, that water call will not extend all the way up into the central and upper divisions. It can only go up to Stewart Dam. So there's separate administration for each one. Don will go through how we determine how much water is available in each division. IDWR has had water right accounting on the Bear River since 1984. We run the county. Oh,
Man, you're gonna have to work on
I'm
your,
gonna have to take
your
your
button
class.
pushing skills before you go on Jeopardy.
I think it's. All right, I thought it was my thumb was too big. Oh, now
Too
you
far.
have.
All right. So
Nope. I'm afraid of.
avoid this section.
Right there. I'll be over. I'll be careful. All right. All right. Sorry, everybody. So we started the accounting at the Wyoming-Idaho border gauge, right here with this star, and we run accounting down through this area, down through the Great Gauge. So we were running accounting for several years, and then late in the nineties, Idaho and Utah decided that since we're running accounting through both states, that we needed an equivalent counting, and we spent time creating two accounting programs, one for Idaho, one for Utah, that are roughly equivalent. So since about 2000, we've been running these new programs. We have our own code, Utah has its own code, and we both run our programs separately. We use the same water rate lists, we each collect data in our state, and then on a weekly basis, we exchange data to run accounting so that we get very similar results. So what water rate accounting does is it documents the natural flow and storage diversions by all the diversions in this area for the entire water year. There are 5 main diversions that in the Bear River Basin: Last Chance, Gentile Thatcher, West Cache, Cup River, and Bear River. And those are the red rectangles that I have on there. But there are many small irrigators in this area, small pumps, small diverters. For convenience, we lump them together and treat them as one larger irrigator. So in Idaho, the Small Irrigator Association has 24 irrigators in it, and in Utah, it has about 90. The last thing I want to talk about on accounting is the Bear River Migratory Refuge. The refuge is right here, these blue polygons, right on the edge of Great Salt Lake. The refuge holds a water right with a 1928 priority date for 1,000 CFS. During the irrigation season, that water right is not in priority. It's too junior to get water delivered to it under that. But irrigation season ends in September in the Bear River Basin. So about 2 or 3 years ago, the refuge started contacting both Idaho and Utah and started talking about that they wanted that water right delivered and they wanted it in accounting in October. So we started working on looking at that right, the impact that it would have if we delivered it in October. We didn't see any impact really for any water rights in Idaho because all the irrigation is off and the stock water rights are on that are senior to it. Will possibly impact a couple of small reservoirs, but we still think they can fill. So we don't think there's a water right impact. So we modified accounting to add the refuge in there, did some testing on it, and we would be ready to run it. Since the refuge is in Utah, Utah is taking the lead on it. They've been talking to the refuge and they've asked the refuge to put in measuring devices. This is a pretty big ask because they divert a lot of water. They got big diversion structures. We're probably talking millions to do that. I'm not sure where that's going to go, but at this point, we'd be willing to put it in the refuge into our county. Okay, so my last 2 slides, I just want to go through a summary of the Idaho Water Resource Board projects in the Bear. The board's been active here for many years. Their loan program, they've had loans since the late 90s. In the basin, the red stars are places where they've made loans. For example, at the Last Chance Canal, they gave a loan to help update their diversion. On the pictures on the bottom here, this is their diversion before. There's their diversion after they constructed it. They built it so a very nice diversion. And then for aging infrastructure grants, there's currently 3. Last Chance Canal, It's up here, Mill Canyon, here, Cub River, down here. Other projects include cloud seeding in the Bear River range. Kayla Golden is gonna talk about that later today. And then, the last project that we've worked on is the Bear Lake Change in Storage Operation. So in 2018, the board filed a water rate on Bear Lake for 400,000 acre feet of additional storage. Utah filed a sister application on their portion of the lake, also for 400,000. To support those applications, the board and Utah and Pacific Corp built a riverware model to look at changing flood control operations on the lake and what that would do. The results were that we could get additional storage in some years. But to do that, we would have to increase the flow at Gentile Valley, which is up in this area right here, from its current maximum of 1,500 CFS to 2,600 CFS. And the board would also have to get flood easements in Gentile Valley in that area. That's an ongoing project that the board is continuing to work. And with that, if there's any questions from the board, there's a lot more coming, so you can either wait or you can ask now, whatever you're ready.
Dean,
Mr. Chairman, Matt, what percentage of irrigation is in each state? I mean, how, does Utah obviously has the most irrigation out of the River Basin? You know, like, I guess, how does the pie split up on which state irrigates with water?
Mr. Stevenson, I'm gonna phone a friend on that one. John, do you happen to know the breakdown?
So there,
This is Don Barnett. He's the engineer manager of the commission. He's gonna talk to us.
and I'll have a slide that will divide up, but not where you'll be able to see that.
Okay.
Oh, you saved me, Don.
all right, you used up that lifeline. Okay. Any other questions for Matt? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank
Sorry
you.
about the technical difficulty.
Hey, you know what? I couldn't even get my computer to turn on this morning, so you're doing great.
So just forward back, here's the red. I thought so too.
We're really, this isn't a test, we're just. Okay, next up, Bear River Compact, Don Barnett, the Bear River Commission is going to present. Thank you for being here.
Matt, it's great to be here and as Matt indicated, so he's given the overview of the Bear River hydrology. I'm talking specifically about the compact. And then Connolly then will talk about operations by Pacific Corp, which is a significant water user and manager of water in the Bear River system. So before I jump into the compact itself, though, let me just tell you that maybe, just maybe, this might be a really big, important year for us. Last year was a great year, water supply year. And this year looks like a good year, except that it's starting to get really hot and dry. And so I'm not sure how it's going to turn out. But as we started contemplating this year, we started looking at when's the last time that the Bear River Basin had 2 good water years back to back. And I was surprised as I looked at this. So this isn't based on snowpack.
Don, I'm just going to interrupt you for a minute. This nice lady, you'd like to be in our meeting. Can we find another chair? So
Great, you grab one of those? Yeah. Okay. Great. Here if you like. Anywhere, let's see, yeah, actually, right here would be good. Okay, I can share out here. Between these two gentlemen. Thank you.
Okay. All right, welcome to our meeting. Thank you, Don.
So last time we had a good 2 back-to-back good water years in the Bear River Basin. And so I looked at it, the upper Bear River Basin, it's been 15 years since we've had 2 back-to-back good water years, actual produced water supply. In the central portion of the Bear River, it's been 25 years since we've had 2 good water years in a row. And in the lower portion, it's been 18 years. So it's a long time, and I'm really hoping that the supply sustains this year so that we can call it a good year. Of course, my definition of a good year is just above average. And 100% of average is just a C. So all I'm asking for is 2 better than C grades is all. So it's been an awfully dry stint in the Bear River Basin, and I know basins in the west, but so we're watching this year. So anyways, jumping into the compact. So I'm going to talk about the Bear River Compact, give you an overview of the compact, the major provisions of the compact, how we operate under the compact, and then the amended compact, because now we're operating under amended compact, and then talk about the Bear River Commission and how it's organized now and functions. So as Matt indicated, you know, we got the Bear River that heads north out of the Uinta Mountains. Gets here to Soda Springs, and then probably because of lava flows just west of here, turn to the Bear River. It may have historically, we're not sure, gone into the Fort Mifflin on down to the Snake, but now it turns, goes south and goes into the Great Salt Lake. What's important to the story as far as the compact is concerned is that it crosses the state lines 5 different times, which means it creates 6 different state sections of the Bear River. And so as growth and development and use of the Bear began to occur, then it opened up the opportunity for conflict and interest between the states and how do we administer a water supply that crosses the state lines. Now, if John Wesley Powlett had his way, he came out west here and he looked at it and he proposed to Congress that maybe we ought to create state boundary lines based upon river drainages. And if that's the case, maybe we wouldn't be meeting in Soda Springs, Idaho, we'd be meeting in Soda Springs in the state of Bear River. But instead, we drew lines the way we drew lines, and so it crosses the state lines. And so, again, there was lots of discussion as the water supply was being developed and used about how do we equitably divide the water between the states as it makes those multiple crossings. Relative to compacting, one of the things you need to know is in order to compact, under the US Constitution, before states can enter into compacts, they need to get permission and then ultimately consent from Congress before they can enter into agreements. And so the states, you know, began this process. They began it by first studying the Bear River, spent an awful lot of money on string gauges and other things in the 1940s. They got permission from Congress. Ultimately, the states negotiated and in the mid-1950s agreed to a compact. That then needed to go out to public notice, receive input, and then it needed to go to the 3 state legislators. And the legislators in the 3 states needed to agree to the compact, pass it in state law, and then it needed to be signed by the governors of the state. Then it went back to Washington to Congress, and Congress passed a bill authorizing the Bear River Compact, and ultimately it was signed by the President of the United States. So there's a lot involved in states compacting, and this same process is required if we were to amend the compact. And one of the things you need to know is that in order to change the compact, it needs to be unanimous between the states. So let's say that 2 of the states decided they wanted to change the Bear River Compact, but 1 state said no, then it stays. Until all 3 states are in agreement, and it goes then through this whole process again. So talking about then the compact, in the 1930s, there started discussions. In the 40s began really significant string gauging program. The compact discussions really got going in earnest in the early 1950s. They were supported by studies by the USGS and some by the Bureau of Reclamation. And that then led to development and identification of the issues. The 2 biggest issues that were talked about over a several year period, and quite honestly were at times quite contentious between the states, were should we divide the water based upon priority, or should we divide the water based upon number of acres being irrigated at the time? And ultimately, they decided to do the number of acres being irrigated at the time rather than priority. And then the other quite contentious issue was additional storage, which could be allowed above Bear Lake. And that was something that was negotiated up and down and in down. So those were the 2 major issues. Not that you can or should be able to read this, just to let you know, there were significant studies. They were out there on every ditch, on every canal, measuring every field, looking at every state water right, to ultimately get a solid feel for all of the number of acres in a consistent manner between each of the states, so that then they could enter into formulas to divide it up. And ultimately, the states agreed to the compact in 1955, and then it was ultimately signed by the President Eisenhower in 1958. compact has, first article talks about purposes, the second is definitions. The definitions are really critical to us because as you move down through the system, it will define this canal's in, this section's out, this is how you calculate this. Article 3 created the Bear River Commission. That's the organization which I serve as the engineer manager of. And then Article 4 talks about distribution of natural flow or direct flow water rights. And then Article 5, the allocation of storage. So we'll jump into that just a little bit. As to then the purposes of the compact was really trying to remove controversy, make for efficient use of the water, allow development and promote interstate comedy. I'm involved in some other river systems, and quite honestly, the Bear has its issues. And it seems, in my estimation, to work better than many other river systems. And this may be a biased approach, but quite honestly, other than support, there's very little federal involvement. So when there's an issue, the states get together and they work it out. Like I say, it's not like the Bear doesn't have issues. It's just that there's the general feel that the states will work it out rather than having the federal government come in and dictate what's going to occur on the Bear River system. As Matt indicated, if we take then the Bear River system, as the negotiators of the compact looked at the Bear River system, they decided that it would be best to divide it into 3 rivers. Some of that was because of historic uses on the river, and some of that was because of priorities. So generally priorities were better as you went upstream and got poor downstream. And so there isn't generally a call that would bring waters from the headwaters downriver. And so then they created this upper division, which goes from the headwaters down to a place called Pixley Dam. That's just a little bit upriver from Cokeville, Wyoming. And then the central division that goes from Pixley Dam down to Stewart Dam, which you will see as your first stop on the tour this afternoon, which is right above Bear Lake. And then the lower division, which is everything below Stewart Dam. When the negotiators then looked at that, they looked at the 4 sections of the river that were in the upper division, and then they determined the percentage of acres in that division within each of those states. And so you can see then the percentages that are associated with the upper division, the number of irrigated acres, and then these are the irrigated acres in the central division, showing them 43% in Wyoming, 57% in Idaho. Again, this is the section just above where you'll start your tour today. They then looked at it and said, what does it take for a full water supply before we begin to enter into interstate regulation or distribution of water? And so in the upper division, they said, as long as the flow is greater than 1,250 second feet, then there's enough water for everybody that's irrigating at the time to get a sufficient delivery of water. And so then below that, then we enter into what's called a water emergency, which is just interstate regulation. And so then when we start below that, if there's only 90% of that water, then each state section gets 90% of their allocation. And if it drops to 80%, everybody gets 80%. In the central division, they looked at it and they said, hey, there's 2 triggers that'll create a water emergency. One is if the flow past the border grade drops below a certain point, 350 second feet, then there's a water emergency. Or if the total divertible flow, the water being used in the section, is below 870, then a water emergency exists and we're short water. And so then we enter into interstate regulation. In the lower division, as Matt showed you the hydrology, there's a lot more water. And also the lower division is blessed with Bear Lake, a very significant storage supply. And so they didn't specifically divide up the waters between Idaho and Utah in the lower division in the original compact, but simply said that if a Utah user is being short of water and can show that it's occurring because of use in Idaho, then that user can petition the commission for interstate delivery, at which point in time, if the commission finds that that's in fact the case, then the state line disappears and the commission just distributes water as if there were no state line, just based on priority between the 2 states. As Matt indicated, you know, in the late 90s, the commission began to receive indication that a Utah user may well petition the commission. So the commission began to get
ready, which led to the creation of an interstate water delivery schedule, which both states have now adopted into their water right accounting, and that both states distribute according to that schedule. So you'll hear people say, well, the lower users have never been regulated under the compact. That's true from a commission standpoint, but every year they're being regulated as if there was a water emergency in the lower division. So, moving to Bear Lake. First of all, you need to know that under the compact, whenever we talk about Bear Lake and elevations and everything's triggered based on elevations, it's based upon an old survey. We know that that measuring point is now not right, but everything in the compact is tied to that survey. So if you're looking at Bear Lake elevations, you need to be careful as to whether you're getting current known elevations of Bear Lake or whether you need to convert them to UP and elevate them. That was established decades ago. So just for you to know that. The bottom of the reservoir at Bear Lake is at an elevation of 5902 and the full is 5923. And then there's Mud Lake, which you're going to see today on the tour. And it's just adjacent to Bear Lake, but is slightly higher elevation. The compact says that the definition of Bear Lake is Bear Lake and Mud Lake. And I'll talk about how we administer according to that definition. Then upstream of Bear Lake, there are a series of reservoirs, but much smaller. The compact identified that there were 14,000 acre feet of reservoirs pre-compact, which were grandfathered in. And then in the original compact, it allocated an additional 36,500 acre feet of new storage to be built after 1955. 1,000 acre feet of that was granted to Idaho, and the remaining amount was given half to Wyoming and half to Utah. These water rights are subordinated to direct flows in the Bear River, but are not subordinated to Bear Lake, which was part of the controversy in the discussions because particularly Idaho users were saying, wait a minute, if this additional storage occurs upstream, then Bear Lake, which is our main water supply, will be impacted. How can we be protected? And so ultimately that led to the discussions of what we call the irrigation reserve, which says that water cannot be released by Pacific Corps from Bear Lake when it drops below a certain elevation. That water needs to be saved in there for future irrigation use. And then they established then a kind of a stepstone number system, whereas additional storage is built upstream, that irrigation reserve goes up. So that as there's greater chance of upstream impact on Bear Lake, the elevation under which Pacific Corps can no longer release water simply for hydropower purposes, but must reserve it for irrigation, also goes up. And so as you look at then the hydrograph on Bear Lake, you can see with that green line there, that's the irrigation reserve, and if storage was built upstream, the elevation of the irrigation reserve went up. Now, this was really driven because Pacific Corps' predecessor, Utah Power and Light Company, used to significantly draft Bear Lake for power purposes only. That's not been Pacific Corps' practice for a number of years. And so that provision of the compact doesn't make a whole lot of difference generally. So anyways, that's then kind of the elevations that are established in Bear Lake based on the compact. The Bear River Commission itself is then organized with 3 representatives from each state. The governors appoint those representatives. It also provides that there can be a federal representative appointed by the president. That person, if appointed by the president, serves as chair, but does not have a vote. And so the controlling interest of the Bear River Commission is really the 9 commissioners from each of the states. The commission doesn't tell the states how they appoint their representatives. That's up to each state. And there's the Idaho code that talks about that 2 of the representatives on the Bear River Commission needs to be within the basin, within the respective areas in the basin. And then the 3rd one also may be the director of the Department of Water Resources. And so currently on the commission, then Matt Weaver serves as a member of the commission, and then you have Carrie Romrell from the Dingle area, we'll go on the tour today, and then Curtis Stoddard from the Grace area. So these are your current representatives on the Bear River Commission. when the compact initially came in, the first 5 years were pretty tough. First of all, the water supply all of a sudden turned fairly dry and things were fairly strained. There were lots of needs for measuring devices and control structures and other things. And so, you know, in those early years, it really kind of led to, all right, we created a compact, but how does it really work? And so with time, it wasn't very long before they started to talk about, should we amend the compact? And some of the discussions were, as I told you, there weren't specific allocations in the lower division. So there was a fear that Utah and Idaho would race for development. You know, that they'd purposefully try and develop as quickly as possible so that they could get priority against the other states. So that was one of the concerns. There were concerns from upstream that too little storage allocation had been granted in the original compact. Groundwater was beginning to be developed and they needed to know how groundwater would be applied under. And then there was a push to say, hey, maybe we ought to be looking at not just diversions, but what are the depletions? What are the effect on the river? So the governors began to talk about things just 9 years after the original compact. Negotiations began in earnest in the early 1970s, and ultimately an amended compact was signed by the president in 1980. Under that then amended compact, there are a couple things that changed. The first thing that did not change is the direct flow of water rights distributed between the states did not change. But then they went and looked at the lower division and said, all right, anything that says in place as of January 1st, 1976 is grandfathered, it's in place. But then additional rights to develop and use water were granted. The first right was given to Idaho for 125,000 acre feet and Utah for 275,000 acre feet. That's the first tier. And then there are two more tiers of development granted in the lower division. And then there was an additional 74,500 acre feet of storage granted above Bear Lake. But this had limitations on it. And these limitations on it, so if we take the amended compact now, there's another 74,000 acre feet, but that is, storage is limited, it's subordinated, first of all, to direct flow rights. Second of all, it's only active if Bear Lake is above a certain elevation. And third of all, regardless of how much storage is developed, it can't deplete more than 28,000 acre feet, and that's combined between all three states. So when you look at that and look at its impact, then it created then this new elevation on Bear Lake, not to regulate Bear Lake, but to regulate upstream storage. Woodruff Narrows Reservoir is the largest reservoir upstream of Bear Lake, and just to get an idea, in the original compact, there's about 18,000 acre feet of original compact storage. The remainder, or about 2/3, is subject to this Bear Lake call of water. And so it's something that we watch carefully and that the users are very much cognizant of. I told you that Bear Lake means Bear Lake and Mud Lake. Under the compact, what that means is today you'll go by the causeway that divides Mud Lake from Bear Lake. And under the compact, we look at it and say, if that causeway were not in place and the two water bodies were able to equalize, then what would be the equivalent elevation in Bear Lake, which means it would come up slightly because water would be then held above it in Bear Lake. And so then the commission developed a procedure, created tables and charts to look at what that, that equivalent elevation would be. And I expect you to be able to read this, because the nice thing is Conway's put this on the commission's website, so you can just look at and say, what is the equivalent elevation on any one day? So this is earlier this year. Bear Lake was at an elevation of 5918.00, but the equivalent elevation was at 5918.11. And you'd say, wait a minute, why in the world would you guys care about 11/100ths of a foot on Bear Lake? And the answer is, if we're in the springtime in a dry year, and maybe Bear Lake is coming up at a rate of 1 to 2 100ths of a foot per day, and upstream, the water coming into the reservoirs for storage, maybe you've only got a 2 or 3 week window for storage or for significant storage. Well, that week could be half of the storage supply, or a third or half of the storage supply. So it's very significant to the upstream users. And when we're in regulation and the upstream storage is restricted, we're watching that equivalent elevation very quickly. to determine which day then they could begin to store, because like I say, their window of storage may be evaporating fairly quickly. All of this background and history is preserved in a document on the commission's website if you're interested in how the compact was developed. One of the things you need to know is the law of the river has as a foundation compact, but there are a number of decrees, there are state appropriative rights. Conley will talk about a settlement agreement on Bear Lake, and then there's an agreement between the states and Pacific Chorus, the operations of the Bear River. So a number of things that go into it. Under the amended compact, things are keyed on depletions. And the commission goes every 5 years and does an inventory of depletions on the Bear River system. And we have Kevin Payne here from Wyoming. He was the chair of the technical advisory committee during the main thrust of this effort, and then just recently finished as Matt was the chair of this group. But it's a lot of work to go through all of the water uses and see what the depletions are. So as to your question, then you can see the allocations, and then you can see the agricultural depletions, which are the third column, so you can get a relative idea as to the depletions which are occurring in each of the states or each sections of each of the states. You can see in Idaho above Bear Lake, the allocation is for 2,000 acre feet of depletions, and Idaho's used a little bit more than half of that thus far or developed, and so they have about 847 acre feet remaining. And then below Stewart Dam in the lower division, then the allocation to Idaho is 125,000 acre feet, of which Idaho's using almost 17,000 acre feet. So a long ways from reaching this depletion. Commissions organized with a series of standing committees. So there's the management committee that oversees all of the functions of the commission, and Matt serves as a member of that management committee. Then you have an operations committee that's giving me directions on the allocations and distribution of water. The records committee that's looking at stream gauging and reports and outreach and those kinds of things. Commission created a water quality committee. And then there's the technical advisory committee that then provides support to these other committees. The commission gets together generally twice a year in April and November and provides direction and input on operations. Under the direction of the operations committee and really led out by the states, the Bear River has a significant number of automated canal gauges. I think that on any day, probably 85 to 90% of the water that's being diverted is under a telemetry measuring point, so that we know what the diversions are occurring. You can find it on the commission's website by just going and drilling down. You'll see an overview of where the Bear River system is, and if you drill down deeper, so for example, this is 2 days ago, the river immediately upstream of where your first stop on the tour. This is the Idaho portion of the central division, and you can see the diversion of all the major canals that are occurring in that area. And then there's the records committee that's involved in hosting tours and outreach and keeping track of the gauges and writing reports. And so there's significant activity by the commission's records committee. Like I say, the water quality committee was created by the commission about 25 years ago that has the water quality leads from each of the states. Up to this point, they really haven't gotten together much, but since then they've been involved in a number of studies and coordinating the water quality up and down the Bear River. It's been a really good move to bring the states together so that they're able to work together on water quality matters on the river. When we get out there on the causeway today, if you look out on the lake, you might see that yellow floating water quality platform, which is several times every hour measuring a number of water quality parameters in Bear Lake on an interstate in Idaho and Utah study of the water quality in Bear Lake. So again, a lot of good coming out of that. And this is, like I say, there's a whole lot more information on the commission's website as to what's going on, but that's kind of 90 miles per hour of what the Bear River Compact is all about.
Okay, board members, any questions for Don?
Chairman.
Yeah.
Don, has all of the additional 74,000 acre feet of storage been developed is allowed
It has not yet.
How far are they?
I don't know. I'm gonna have to look that up. That's a good question. I can tell you Idaho hasn't developed its 4,500.
It is because there's really, the water's not available. Or the sites are not available.
I think it's more driven by economics to look at the water supply and say, well, if we were to build, so for example, there's been several different sites that have been studied a number of times over the years. And they look at it and say, well, what is it going to cost for us to build 5,000 acre feet of storage? What would be the annual yield out of that? And then what's the value of the water? And it just that I think that's why the development has trailed off over the years. It's a value. Obviously, then there would be folks downstream that have been receiving that undeveloped storage for years that would be looking at development of those projects if they would occur.
Right. Mr. Chairman, Don, do you have to deal with, bull trout or cutthroat trout issues? Do you have dewatering problems anywhere?
So that hasn't entered into regulation on the Bear River thus far. There are certainly places where there are dry dams in the system. And some of particularly Trout Unlimited has been fairly proactive in working with irrigators, coming in and saying, if we bring in money, can we change your diversion structure and those kinds of things? But so far, it hasn't been something that's really led to significant operations. Remember though, that from my standpoint, from the compact standpoint, compact just distributes waters to the states. So I don't go out and turn head gates. The states under state law turn head gates and deal with the detail of the regulation. The compact just says, here's state, this is your block of water, and then you divide it up according to your own laws, according to your own priorities.
Thank you, Don. Connolly.
Mr. Chairman of the Commission, Director Weaver, glad to present today and well informed observer, but hopefully I have a little interesting facts and some nuance. And of course, this afternoon you'll see it in person. So, yeah, pleased to speak to you today. I just note, just while we're getting it up, this is 4% of our corporation. We do operate as Rocky Mountain Power in Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, and then Pacific Power in mostly Oregon, with a little bit in Washington and a little bit in California as well. So it's all one company, but I kind of stay on the generation side. So anytime people have kind of transmission or distribution issues, I have to kind of refer to all my colleagues. And my role is purpose hydrologist, and all of you help support kind of power operations. And I have some fun, interesting work on efficiency curves and hydro operations. My role is motivated to be the intermediary with the irrigation interests and irrigation deliveries on the Bear River and Bear Lake. So, but I would go ahead and go there to start with kind of interesting another. So another view of the Bear River watershed, but I kind of turned it so you're Idaho centric here, looking south. And another interesting little addition to this view is, let's see, where's the is I highlighted the main irrigation areas. So really the irrigation in the lower division from Bear Lake really starts after it turns the corner here and into the Grace area in Gentile Valley. And then another area in Cache Valley, kind of half in Idaho, half in Utah, but most of the irrigation diversions that even irrigated in Utah are Idaho water rights. They're diverted and then flow down into Cache Valley and other areas. And then the other area is Bear River County in Box Elder County, which is about half of the 150,000 acres that's irrigated supplementally from Bear Lake. And continuing through this part and the Grace part, that's enough for roughly half of that 150,000 acres. So that's irrigated from Bear Lake. And you can kind of see again the little bit of the Bear River flowing in there here, and then a few of that inlet brown canal into Bear Lake, and then the cyan flow out of Bear Lake. One other tidbit, There are no federal dams on the main stem of the Bear River. There are only two small, Bureau of Reclamation dams in Cache Valley, Utah. So they're all private reservoirs and so that's basically a little bit interesting. So focusing on Bear Lake, they've mentioned the storage component, but the natural lake is 6.5 million acre-feet. And the lake is estimated that it could be up to 6 million years old because of the fault line on the east side of Bear Lake. So there are 4 endemic fish, which makes it very interesting. And Pacific Corp does own the water right for that reservoir portion. Idaho Board of Water Resources does have the water right below 5902 for the natural portion. It remains for aesthetics. And we'll get into kind of the inflows and outflows, but it's interesting to note that even though when settlers came, Bear River did not flow into Bear Lake for the most of the last 220,000 years. The Bear River did flow directly into and out of Bear Lake. So a little bit of a focus on the inflow and outflow. Matt already showed this, and then you can kind of see some of the details on the left there, and so this is an interesting side view, similar to some of the other views, but it just emphasizes that Mud Lake is the re-regulation. All the water that comes in and out of Bear Lake and Bear River flows through Mud Lake, and it is now a Bear Lake National Wildlife Refuge area since 1965. And you kind of see how the water flows in by gravity and then gets pumped out. And the causeway that was pointed out, that sandbar between Bear Lake and Mud Lake, is a natural feature. It was raised in just a few little spots, but nothing major. So that is a natural barrier. And historically, Bear River, rather Bear Lake, would overflow regularly and flood over the water to the Bear River. So a little bit of the history, as electrification took place, especially in the Salt Valley and also regionally, there was a need for much more power as that grew. The small hydro plants on the creeks in the valleys didn't quite cut it, and so power companies consolidated and looked to the Bear River for larger power generation and developed about 100 megawatts of generation. That was the foundation for the low growth in that area. And both the irrigators and the power company identified Bear Lake as a good reservoir site. And even when John Weston Powell came through, he identified Bear Lake as U.S. Reservoir #1, which was then developed. Interestingly, kind of before the approval in 1907, there were some laws that allowed for development of canals and ditches. And so the irrigation company, led mostly by Bear River Canal Company's predecessor, started digging an outlet canal and kind of dammed up the natural outlet of Bear Lake. And then the power company was kind of working on the inlets. And then in 1907, the power company was given kind of the final allowance to build, but the irrigation interest was still kind of present on the outlet canal. So in 1912, there was an agreement for the power company to develop and operate Bear Lake, but providing irrigation deliveries to Bear River Canal Company, which was then expanded to other canal companies since the federal approval required that Pacific Corp deliver primarily for irrigation. So there's some pictures of things you'll see today. And it's interesting, in the first half of the century, Pacific Corp's predecessor did operate and use water from Bear Lake for power production throughout that 1920s, 30s period, which did contribute to the low lake level in 1936. And it also became part of the motivation for the compacting process. So I'm sure there were many purposes, but the low level of Bear Lake and those concerns that power deliveries were contributing to that was part of that motivation. Then in the second half of the 20th century, kind of more near the end, there were some environmental concerns about the lake levels of Bear Lake, because there was no implicit or there was no explicit limitation on the volumes that could be released for irrigation on an annual basis. And so that prompted a settlement agreement to a lawsuit that was in place from environmental interests that resulted in a settlement agreement, which the primary result of that operation was that there's an annual allocation, that 245,000 acre foot maximum annual allocation that Don mentioned. And I don't show the graph, but the allocation does indeed decrease rather sharply when it gets below that irrigation reserve of 5914.6. And then, of course, the lake is below 5904, just 2 feet above its minimum elevation, there is no allocation. And just to know that well, we'll get into and show some of the impacts of that in the future slide. So I guess one other interesting note that I think it was mostly the Bear Lake Settlement Agreement that motivated the interstate allocation, because the interstate water accounting model rather, because the allocations to irrigators had to be quantified, and that required a consistent accounting of the storage water deliveries in Idaho and Utah, which there were some differences and different interpretations that Idaho and Utah had that kind of made the allocation, the accounting for the allocation to the irrigators a little bit confusing and inconsistent. So that was 1994. Then in 2004 was just a modification to account for the lost water, or the kind of some of the seepage losses there. Pacific Corp was bought out by a foreign entity at one point in the 1999-2000 period, and so the states were concerned that there would be drastic changes to the operations, and so the settlement agreements with the states didn't emphasize that Pacific Corp would operate as it historically has. And it also mentioned just in a little bit of a detail how Bear Lake would be operated for flood control, which came to the forefront during some of the 1970s and 1980s Iran periods. So this chart emphasizes the volumes of water annually that are diverted in total, and the components by the irrigators in the lower division below Bear Lake, and all the diversions off on the main stem of 6 irrigation companies that you can see on the left that have irrigation contracts with Pacific Corp. So the top of the blue bar, that's the total diversion, and then between the blue bar down, that shows the light blue is storage water and the green is natural flow. And then above there is the top of this bar would be the annual storage allocation, which varies up and down because it's the volume of allocation above the natural flow. And so that would be kind of the remaining allocation to be unused. And the allocation began about 1995, but using the lake levels, you kind of estimate what it would have been in years before then. And so it's interesting to know that the annual total volume of diverted irrigation in lower division is about 400,000 acre feet. And you can see at least half of that is supplied by natural flow. And in some years, like 2011 and 2011. Yeah, so in 2011, it was met completely by natural flow. There's no deliveries from Bear Lake for storage or irrigation, from storage for irrigation. But of course, there were releases for flood control in those years. You can see in the 2000s drought that the allocations were pretty well used. 2003 to 2004 were the only years when the allocation made a significant impact on the irrigation diversions of those 6 companies. And so other than that, they've had essentially a full supply in all of those years. 2021 was an interesting year because they had a full allocation, but because of the severe lack of runoff, even the full allocation in the middle of the summer did not look like it was going to allow for a full supply. They were starting to cut back their irrigation diversion rates in anticipation of running out of storage. And so there was a concerted effort to potentially modify that maximum allocation and came close to kind of coming to some agreement. And luckily, in the middle of back and forth between lawyerly agreements, the rains came and obviated the need for any of that work. So they did end up coming almost to their maximum allocation, but they did have just a little bit left over because of the rainfall that happened in that period. So another plot of the annual allocations, but just not allocations, but the Bear Lake elevations. Just to emphasize the flood control operations when Bear Lake is near full is to target bringing it down by March 31st to 5918. And once we get some good runoff information, usually beginning in January, we're able to kind of modify that target a little bit, maybe end just a little bit higher than we otherwise would. And if it's really a very wet year, we could decrease it down to 5920 to have a little bit of additional flood control storage. But if you're able to reach our 5918 elevation, then we have a little over 5.5 feet of freeboard to absorb high runoff in that spring. So hydro operations, kind of in current operations, it's kind of an afterthought, but it's important to know that all of the water released from Bear Lake is indeed used for power. So we do make use of every drop, even though it's released primarily for irrigation and flood control. And we do keep our reservoirs, our power reservoirs typically full, but we do draw them down when needed for high runoff. But of course, it's the reservoirs volume are relatively small compared to the incoming flow. So it kind of takes a little bit of a peak off of the spring maximum flows, but yeah, it's only they only need to operate that way for like 2 or 3 weeks. When we have that peak period, so otherwise they're high. And then we do fluctuate them a little bit for irrigation rebalancing as the water takes 4 days to come from Bear Lake Outlet Canal down to the last delivery point in Utah at Cutler Dam. So one other interesting thing that's come up recently is the opportunity for pump storage. And one of the best sites is actually on the existing Oneida Narrows Reservoir, which is the last dam in Idaho that this reservoir operates. And so you would operate and only fluctuate water back and forth from Oneida Reservoir to an upper reservoir, which would be relatively small, 23 acres in surface area, 2,100 acre feet of active capacity. And it wouldn't be a new addition to storage, it's just a new place for the active storage of Oneida Narrows. Yeah. So this is kind of a picture of what it might look like from the docks at Oneida Narrows Reservoir. You would just barely be able to see the twin penstocks going up to the reservoir. The new upper reservoir, which would be pretty much completely hidden from view, just kind of by the chance of the topography. And so very little visual impact. And so the kind of interesting opportunity there. And if we did have a meeting already with the public, kind of describing it and having a site visit. And we would, I think we're ongoing with feasibility studies. And if we end up pursuing it further, then we would begin relicensing it along with our other main stem Idaho Bear River projects in 2027. And that's all I have. Any questions?
Questions for Connolly? Mark?
Thank you. Conley, I was asked the other day, and I thought I knew the answer to this, but I'm not sure I do now. At high elevations on Bear Lake, does the water gravity flow out of Bear Lake back into the outlet canal?
It can just a little bit, but not much head difference between.
Couple feet out.
Yeah, a couple
as I
of
remember.
Yeah, and so it's interesting, we can, but in the last time that actually happened, it was more convenient just to run the pumps, even though they had kind of positive head pressure already, just kind of get it flowing and have better control.
So
Yeah.
essentially you always pump,
Yeah,
but it's possible, what's possible high elevation
yeah,
that you have.
yes, it is, so.
I'm good to call you that.
Brian,
Mr. Chairman Connolly, adding to Mark's question, so in the winter time, when the irrigators are not using it, and you gotta keep some flows in the Bear River, so do you still take it through the lake and then lift it out of the lift and plant, or do you just send it down the river?
So there are no minimum flows out with Bear Lake, so we during the winter, when we are storing for irrigation, everything is going into Bear Lake.
So you don't run the pumps then it's winter time?
No. No, unless we have flood control releases during the winter, which is relatively rare.
Chairman,
yes,
I have some questions about the FERC process. So are all of your projects under one FERC license?
Yeah, in Idaho, they are. There's a separate for the Cutler project, and in Bear Lake is not FERC regulated.
And so this Oneida Narrows pump storage project, would that be a new FERC license or would that be an addition to the existing?
It would be merged into the existing FERC license.
Dean, and then back to Brian.
Mr. Chairman, do the space holders contract with Rocky Mountain Power for the space, or I mean, in the Upper Snake, they contract with the Bureau, but how do the space holders contract for space?
So they have no ownership interest at all. It's just strictly through a delivery contract with Pacific Corp. So it's pretty unique in that water rights Pacific Corps, and there's no interest in the volume. Bear Lake, so they don't have any control that way. It's just through the annual allocation of their only delivery mechanism.
Dean, in Bureau reclamation jargon, it's kind of the equivalent of a water supply contract versus a space holder contract. It's a water
Okay,
supply.
okay, all right.
But I think it would be important to know that there's no new contracts. So the last time Pacific Corp wrote a contract would have been
1989.
1989. So it's been fully out of it.
And that's in the settlement agreement.
Yeah, settlement agreement and the
99 or 2000.
yeah, and also the Bear Lake settlement agreement and also the 3 state agreements. With states also, that emphasizes that as well.
Right.
On the pump storage, that reservoir would be a lined reservoir, I guess.
Yes, that's the plan.
Okay. Other questions from Connolly? Okay, thank you very much, and you're gonna be on the tour this afternoon?
Yes.
Okay, appreciate that. Okay, next we have Bear River Basin Adjudication report.
James, are you gonna introduce or?
I can. These two gentlemen, presenting Brian are some of our new agents. Of the office. You guys know, we opened the Preston Field office. It's been probably 2 years ago. And Christopher Holmes is our supervisor out of that office. He's not able to be here today, but he sent these guys to give us an update on where we're at in the Bear River Adjudication. And that office is open and they are doing some good work. They receive a lot of customers coming in and helping people fill out those initial claims. We haven't really got to the review stage, but all that was a get back. That's the
Good. Hey, welcome. Thank you. Over here.
All right, my name is Jose Pacheco. Thank you for having me, Chairman and Board. So the Bear River Basin Adjudication. I'm based out of the Preston Field office right now, and I'll go over a few topics today. The purpose of the adjudication, which will be a review for most everyone, background on the Bear River Basin Adjudication, updates on where we're at, resources, and go from there. So our staff, Chris Holmes is the supervisor there, and we work with many other colleagues in the department, as well as with the court, Craig Saxon, James Cephalo, Angela Hansen, and on the legal side, Lacey, Brandon O'Brien, and Paul Harrington. We work with when we have concerns, and will ultimately be the ones to do the final reviews on that. So this is
The big review side, why are we doing the adjudication, which is the question that we receive on a daily basis. Why do I have to do this? When they started the Snake River Basin in the eighties, it was the goal to get an accurate inventory of all the water rights in the state of Idaho, which included beneficial use rights, also known as constitutional or invisible water rights. And the adjudication is a way to confirm the statutory claims that have been filed in the past and make any corrections, especially to point of diversions, which are not accurate just because they didn't have the GIS technology back then. And to be able to protect those water rights when disputes arise. And it's based off of the Idaho Code 42-1406C, that the effective management of the waters of the River Basin requires that a comprehensive determination of the nature, extent and priority of the rights of the users of surface and groundwater be determined. So that is the goal, is to determine these so that they can be protected in times of scarcity. The background with the adjudication started back in 2020 when the legislative session initiated it, and then in late 2020 the petition was filed to commence it. And the important date for us on the adjudication side is June 15, 2021. That is the date when the order was issued and when we started making progress and opened the field office a year later in 2022. Right now we have a supervisor, 4 agents there, including myself, and 1 technical record specialist. And just last year, January and April, we sent out the first commencement notices to the Basin 11, which is the Bear Lake side, including Soda Springs, with deadlines to file October and December of last year. We're still receiving late claims on that, but we have begun the recommendation stage on that side. And just this year, March and June, we sent out commencement letters to start the Franklin County side, splitting it east and west of the Bear River, with deadlines in October and February. And this is just a small part of the whole state of Idaho adjudications. The 80 to 85% of it is the Snake River Basin, but there's the northern region, which has ongoing adjudications right now, and just beginning the Kootenai River Basin adjudication. It's just barely at the beginning stage. We're down the corner. So currently, this is the update of where we're at. Basin 11, once again, is the Bear Lake side that we had reported water rights, 1,745 reported, and so far we're still accepting claims, but so far we're just under 3,000 claims that we've received for those 2, and this was as of 2 weeks ago. And Basin 13 is the Franklin County side, about the 2,000 that we have already reported water rights, and so far claims just over 500. So going forward, Basin 11 and 13 is where the focus is, primarily because that's where the concentration of people are and water rights are. So those will take the longest, and the projection is by 2031 to have completed taking claims, of course, recommending and doing field examinations, ending in the director's report. And then in 2031, approximately, to begin together Basin 15 and Basin 17, which is Malad City and West, and then including that by 2034. So this is part of the resources side. How can they file claims? We've been getting the majority of our claims coming into the office or calling and making an appointment. And so the third one is what we've been working with the most. Filing the paper claim online is also a preferred method. The most challenging one is the online one. Just because it's, software side. It's a challenge there, but claims can also be filed at other state offices. So the adjudication website has the two big buttons there. We usually gear people towards filing the paper claim. It's just a fillable PDF. But the online claim is available and you can log in, create an account and do it that way as well. And other resources are on there, including decrees in the area, the commencement notices are all on the website as well, and a lot of information with the Q&A PDF. And just to end, this was late Justice Scalia at the conclusion of the Snake River Basin adjudication. A quote from him: "Adjudication serves a noble purpose that lets people of Idaho know just what they own. Everything from farming to fishing to mining and manufacturing requires water. Each of these will go smoothly now that they know what they
Like it all with justice.
Good thing we got the adjudication or we'd have some problems.
So if anybody has any questions?
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I have one. So this adjudication for the river will go all the way to the west to pick up where it connects with the Snake River adjudication, is that right?
Yeah, where it borders it, yes.
Okay. There's not much water.
Right. Okay. All right, thank you very much. Appreciate your efforts. Okay, I think maybe we'll take a break, 10-minute break. It'll probably be longer than that, but we'll try.
Undoubtedly.
Put it lower.
Not a problem. You can return it when you're back from vacation. I have another one in the office, so.
Some of it.
He would know.
The other thing. Part of the old building, but I'm gonna take it down. I want it left for landlord. So it's good there.
Next job then?
Yeah.
The world's most engineer.
I got off the California. The blue line. You're 400. Okay.
Well, maybe I would try to roll that on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was 5 hours.
That's all it takes. I don't know about it.
I went in there like on a Wednesday. Back, I'll be trying to get Memorial. So I went, I took the highway straight for my. And it was like, I 23 miles. But I think it's fast.
You can't get
Part of this one.
You didn't have to get back.
Yeah.
Cynthia's board to figure out. So, thanks for no worries.
I'm bringing it. Take it tomorrow. I was trying to figure out how many copies.
Yeah, really. You're on your agenda.
Next week, but rather than building
That one. I got. I have no staff. It's like Mark. You know, I thought it was fun getting this. Yeah. Pretty good. Oh, yeah.
Actually, had this power board built twice.
I haven't had that.
You got the same thing. I got the same thing as the river.
We ran all.
Yeah, I think that we did. All right, I think. Okay. Okay, if we could, we'd like to reconvene. Everybody got a chance to visit for a minute. We're to agenda item number 7. Bear River class seating update, and I believe, Kayla is online on Zoom. Take it away,
Yeah.
Kayla.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're coming in loud and clear.
Okay, awesome. Well, yes, thank you. It's nice to see you all this morning. I'm holding down the fort here in Boise, and I am joined today by Utah's meteorologist who will be coming for a presentation following mine on cloud seeding for Utah. And then as well, you have Utah's cloud seeding program manager there in the room, Jake Sarago, who will follow our presentation for an update on the Great Salt Lake plan. So I'm going to start, Mr. Chairman, by giving you guys a refresher on the feasibility and design study that we've done. Or I'm sorry, excuse me, start with, I'm one slide off here on my things moving a little bit slow. If my slides will move, there we go for. Start out with just a refresher on our project motive. So why are we looking into cloud seeding in the Bear River Basin? Give you a brief review of the feasibility and design study that NCAR conducted, and then walk you through some next steps and some of my recommendations should we choose to pursue cloud seeding in this basin. So just a quick start to refresh you on our program development. I'm not going to walk through development timeline, but some of the key points here that I want to point out and why are we doing cloud seeding in the Bear is that this was really a result of House Bill 266 and legislation that was passed in 2021. Part of that legislation directed the board to consider how cloud seeding might support water supply in other areas of the state. And so given that we had already had efforts, tri-state efforts going on to manage water supply in the Bear River Basin, the board then directed staff to conduct a feasibility and design study in the Bear River Basin to help us determine if increased water supply through cloud seeding could support water management objectives in the basin. So that's really how we got here, why we're here, and why we've conducted this feasibility study. So a high level, the feasibility and design study kicked off right after that legislation in 2021. The objectives were to increase water supply in Bear Lake and regions that support supply in Idaho. So we asked NCAR to conduct an investigation looking for opportunities for both ground seeding and aircraft, as well as assess opportunities for shared infrastructure with the collaborative cloud seeding program's Upper Snake River Basin project. December 2021 was when we finally got this kicked off, and NCAR started their feasibility and design in August of that year. It was a fairly ambitious timeline, I would say, to get an aircraft in the ground following that feasibility and design, but we were able to get it going in December, and we did run 1 year of a pilot aircraft project in the basin. And so those operations did utilize some of the preliminary results, which were then presented and final to you all last September. And I would say high level, some of the main lessons learned from our pilot project in the Bear River Basin are really come down to the caliber of aircraft, at least in terms of aircraft operations. So if you recall, we received 2 bids for those operations, and they were about a 50% disparity in cost. That was 100% due to the caliber of aircraft that we used. And operationally, we then learned some lessons from that. So wintertime cloud seeding and summertime convective cloud seeding, as you know, are 2 different types of cloud seeding. And here in Idaho, where we do winter cloud seeding, we experience significantly more icing conditions than some of the aircrafts that are used for summer convective storms. And so because of that, we require a larger caliber of aircraft to support operations, aircraft, generally multi-engine aircraft that can sustain the type of icing that we need for seeding. And so that was one of the main lessons that we learned, was that we need a larger caliber of aircraft to support operations in these mountainous regions. And that does come at a cost, quite a bit more of a cost when you're operating a much larger plane. And so not only is it the cost and operational efficiency, but number one, the safety of the pilot and crew. So when you get in these icing conditions, oftentimes these planes will need to either pull up or go below a cloud to shed some of that ice, so that that airplane doesn't essentially become a brick in the sky. And so it is very much a safety concern having a caliber of aircraft that can sustain ice, to be able to pull up out of a cloud when necessary, because as you know, here in Idaho in a mountainous region, you don't really have the options to drop below a cloud because you'll run into a mountaintop. So there's a number of reasons why we really need to have a larger caliber of aircraft. And again, that does come with a cost. So one of the second lessons that we learned from that pilot project was the number of crew members. So with our pilot project, we ran a 1 pilot operation. We have since learned, for safety, efficiency, tracking, and reporting, that it's definitely necessary to have at least 2 crew members for our operations. So that's, again, a cost increase, that we may have to consider. In addition to, the safety of the aircraft, we are also, currently hearing, the need for more transparency, better tracking, better reporting. That is another reason why we need to have a second pilot for our operations, so that we have 1 person that's dedicated to flying that airplane and 1 person that's dedicated to conducting operations, tracking, and reporting. Another lesson that we learned, as you'll see from some of these maps, is this is a pretty large basin. 1 aircraft can't reasonably cover all of the seeding opportunities, which then requires us to sort of prioritize which regions that we want to seed. Another thing that we learned through this was we use a lot of we use models here in Idaho to guide our operations. That's because a lot of these models are specifically calibrated to our regions where we experience subclimates. And so where you experience subclimates, and some of the disparity with the national models is they don't do as well at forecasting weather and catching some of those local climates. And so it does improve the efficiency of our operations to have those detailed models to help guide operations. And then we can also use that modeled information to help with analyses as well. And so I would say long-term, the main lesson, again, learned with this is that, if we are going to continue with aircraft, most certainly we need to consider a larger caliber of aircraft and require a 2-person crew. And that is going to come with a cost. So looking high level at NCAR's recommendations, this is a snapshot from what they presented to you all last September. So when they conducted the feasibility and design study for the Bear River Basin, let's see if I can get my pointer on here. We've got Bear Lake right here for reference, Great Salt Lake. And so NCAR, when they did this evaluation, they tested flight tracks that were shorter and flight tracks that were longer to see basically which is going to be more efficient. And ultimately what they determined is that shorter flight tracks tend to increase our operational efficiency. And so the challenge with that is, as you can see with this basin, is then that requires a lot of taxiing time for the aircraft to and from some of these regions. And that's money spent that we're not cloud seeding. We're instead spending time and money taxiing aircraft between basins. or subregions of the basin. And so again, that is another reason why, multi-aircraft is probably best, for this basin. So overlapping some of these, just for reference, there could potentially be a need for 2 separate aircraft in this basin, one that could target the lower region of the Bear River Range over here in this magenta circle, and potentially another one that could cover the Uintas Headwaters Range that feeds into Bear Lake. And so the benefit of that is that, each state, which respectively has interest in cloud seeding in these basins, as well as nearby basins, could reasonably operate our own aircraft that could then be used to share and target operations in our other respective priority basins. And so, as you all are aware, aircraft is typically the most expensive infrastructure of cloud seeding. And given the need to conduct multiple aircraft in this basin, it would be a reasonable way to split costs. So for us here in Idaho, we asked NCAR to look at the possibility for shared infrastructure with our Upper Snake River Basin project. We've long known that there is, need or ability for a second aircraft to help support the Upper Snake River Basin because it's such a large geographic area. And it does overlap with what NCAR has proposed with the Bear River region. And so there would be significant operational and cost efficiency to potentially consider an extension of our collaborative project and sharing infrastructure to support both basins. Really quickly on the ground seeding, we see basically the same thing, 2 separate subregions that NCAR is proposing to conduct ground operations. Typically, when you put in ground operations, as we've talked through before, there's a lot more required to implement infrastructure. You're talking siting of equipment, land leases that are typically on federal land, finding sites that are operationally feasible that we can get this equipment in. So there's a lot more involved with that. And in talking to some of our program partners and how we've developed our projects here in Idaho previously, given all of the needs, and the requirements to get infrastructure in, it's reasonable that we could only get about, 5 to 10, 5 generators approximately per year. And so factoring that when you're only implementing those, NCAR also gave us sort of a priority list. If you want to put in a couple generators, maybe target this group for most efficiency. And if you want to, do a couple, then they gave us a range of which groups of generators to target to be most efficient. And then obviously the gold-plated option would be to put in the entire infrastructure of ground, both in the Uintas region and in the lower Bear. But again, that does come with significantly more cost. So the other thing that we asked NCAR to do was to look at shared infrastructure with our Upper Snake Basin, as I had mentioned. So they looked at both ground and aerial operations. And I'm going to just apologize really quickly, Mr. Chairman, the titling on these are backwards. So the pie charts on the top should actually be the pie charts for the cases selected for the Bear River Basin. And so to explain this slide really briefly, what you're looking at over here is a windrow. And so basically what NCAR has done is they've taken our historical weather data, they've plugged it into a model, and then they've looked for specific times in historical weather pattern where we saw the best seeding conditions. And then they use the model to basically simulate cloud seeding and see what happens. And so this is 3 separate case periods of what you're seeing, a case period being an operational period of a couple hours. And so they basically simulated cloud seeding during these cases, and then they calculated the results. And so you will see some acre-foot quantities here on roughly what they have estimated to have come out of these model simulations. And these quantities of acre-feet are the quantities per case. So each of these cases was ran, they totaled up approximately how much acre-feet they estimated per case. And these 3 cases cumulatively are what you're seeing on these charts over here. And so I know some of you are probably thinking, well, why can't we just figure out the average number of cases per season and times that by, these numbers and figure out roughly how many acre-feet we're going to get? And unfortunately, it's not that simple, and we can't quite quantify it that way. But looking at specific case studies, the key point here is that we do see that there is seeding opportunities. And we do see that there's opportunities to impact both the Bear River Basin as well as the Upper Snake Basin when we use shared infrastructure. And so the color schemes that you're seeing on here, the orange is primarily impacts to the Upper Snake. The blue is primarily impacts to the Bear. So again, these titles are a little bit different, or excuse me, mixed up. But if essentially what this is saying is if we are looking at winds out of the northwest, and we are using the shared infrastructure that you see here on the map, this is roughly the distribution of impacts that we would see from targeting shared infrastructure, or excuse me, from the Bear River Basin. So this one down here, which should be shared infrastructure, same thing. Looking at all of these cases cumulatively, the majority of the impacts, as you will see, actually hit the Upper Snake Basin. So we do still see benefits to the Bear River Basin, but when we're utilizing shared infrastructure, we definitely see, significantly more benefit to the Upper Snake Basin with how some of these operations ran. But key point here is we have an opportunity to seed both basins, and really with using an aircraft, particularly, we can target these and prioritize depending on, what the board declares as priority between these regions. So key points that came out of this study. Yeah.
Back up to that last slide.
You bet.
Over here on the right-hand side, you've got 5 red dots that are Idaho Power Company. Are those ground generators currently in place, or would that be an expansion?
Nope, those are the existing ground generators. So NCAR evaluated Idaho Power's existing ground generators that are in the Upper Snake Basin. Those are going to be the red dots that you're seeing. And then the blue dots that you're seeing are hypothetical generators that we could put in.
Are these amounts that you're forecasting from the 3 hypotheticals, or do they include the existing 5 in place?
So, Mr. Chairman, if the first column here is combined. So that's all of them together. This column here in the middle is if we only use Idaho Power's generators. So that would just be the 5. And this column here results is if we only use the 3 hypothetical generators proposed. So what you can see is we get the biggest bang for our buck if we use the existing Idaho Power generators and add 3 more. We still get pretty good bang for our buck just using Idaho Power's existing generators, which is obviously very cost effective. And we get a lot less bang if we just put in 3 new generators.
So does Idaho Power currently operate the existing generators when we have a northwest wind? Or do they only operate them when we have a southwest wind?
Presently, they are only operating those to target the Upper Snake River Basin.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So key points coming out of this, these are NCAR key points coming out of the study, is that cloud seeding with silver iodide has been shown to produce snowfall. So we know that coming out of Snowy. We know that cloud seeding can enhance snowfall. So we also know that there are opportunities for silver iodide seeding in the Bear River Basin. I think we knew that sort of to begin with because the state of Utah had already been conducting some level of operations. Third key point is that they would recommend airborne seeding over ground-based seeding. And the reason for that is because some of the flow blocking issues that they've seen in these regions. So with some of these high mountain elevations, you all have seen, you know what an inversion layer is. You've seen a smokestack, below an inversion layer when it kind of goes up and it hits it and it goes over. It's not able to get up into that cloud. And so that's a challenge for cloud seeding when you deal with inversion layers and mountain flow blocking. You can't get that seeding material up into the cloud where it's needed. And so that's then why we generally target remote generators, because we need to put them at the higher elevations. But what NCAR is saying is certainly there's, ground opportunities for seeding here, but based on historical weather patterns, there is significant flow blocking issues. And because of that, they're recommending aircraft over ground because you have the ability to get above those inversion layers and be flexible with where you're targeting that seeding. And so again, it's not to say that there's not significant benefit with the ground operations. They're just saying that holistically, it's most efficient to use both. And if you're going to target one versus the other, to choose the aircraft, because it doesn't have such limitations as the ground with some of these mountain flow blocking. Going further for us, when we're looking at costs and capital and infrastructure, there's also a lot less cost and investment into getting an aircraft versus siting infrastructure. It's a lot more permanent. They're saying if we pursue it, one or the other, that aircraft should be done over ground, but cumulatively both together is the way to be most efficient. They've also looked at liquid opportunities for potentially using liquid propane as a seeding agent in the Bear River Basin. And based on early model results, we're certainly seeing opportunities for liquid propane seeding in this basin as well. And so lastly, obviously looking at a shared infrastructure, they recognize there's certainly opportunities to partner with our Upper Snake River Basin project and potentially utilize infrastructure to support both basins. So this is a snapshot just to orient everybody. Again, we've got Bear Lake over here to the right. These teal pinpoints that you're seeing are the state of Utah's existing manual generators that are already in the Bear River Basin. The stars that you're seeing, these blue snowflakes, are the generator sites, the remote generator sites that NCAR has proposed. So one of the key differences that you'll see between these, I've got elevation tables for where the elevations are for some of Utah's manual generators versus what NCAR is proposing. And again, the reason they are proposing these higher elevations is because of the mountain flow blocking issues. And so we're going to hear from Jonathan Jennings next on their plans in the Bear River Basin and what they're planning to do with their infrastructure. So I won't say any more on that, but I did at least want to, sort of orient you with what's already existing in this basin versus what NCAR is proposing for you. So, Mr. Chairman, the next steps here is kind of really where we're at. We've been through the feasibility and design study. We've got the range of options, but really what makes sense for us here in Idaho. So we obviously have the option of a comprehensive full-scale program, the total gold standard. That would be implementing ground and aircraft operations. We have the option of just doing a dedicated aircraft to target the Bear River Basin. We could just do an aircraft that's shared. If we're just, wanting to step into the basin, maybe that's the best route where we still have opportunities to enhance our other priority regions, as well as support water supply in the Bear River Range. And then the other option would be just to pursue ground operations, which would probably be my least recommendation, given the infrastructure and challenges involved with that, at least for the state of Idaho. So the next question, then, Mr. Chairman, is really, we've been asked this question: how does cloud seeding benefit us, or how is cloud seeding going to benefit water supply? But I think it's important that we really take a step back and remind ourselves that the point of cloud seeding is to increase water supply. And so whether you're building a pipeline over a mountain, you're trucking water in, or you're cloud seeding, which is really the only feasible mechanism we have here in Idaho, the point is that we are increasing water supply. So the question really, Mr. Chairman, is how will increased water supply affect water availability and/or use in the basin? And so to answer that, we really need to answer the question is, what is the need for increased supply in the Bear River Basin? Not how can cloud seeding support it? Cloud seeding increases supply, but what is the need for increased supply? And how will increased water supply support water management goals in the basin? And then lastly, that's kind of where cloud seeding comes in. Then we get to the question of, well, what is the potential for cloud seeding to support these goals? And to answer that, we really need more data. So a one-year pilot project is more of a trial run than a pilot project. Sort of the difference between a trial and a pilot is the level of complexity. And so, really what we need to start considering is a pilot project to really evaluate this question if we are interested in cloud seeding in this basin. And so these are my staff recommendations for you all. Would be to, one, if you wish to pursue cloud seeding in this basin, to start with conducting a 5-year pilot project. This is exactly what we did in the upper Snake River Basin following the camp. We started with a 5-year pilot project to evaluate the potential. And once we saw that potential, we chose to move forward. And so that is what I am proposing exactly for the Bear River Basin. Again, it's less capital investment. We don't have to put in a lot of that infrastructure. It's less resources, both in terms of contracting and staff time. Significantly reduces staff time to implement, to do this. And it also doesn't require the extensive development of infrastructure. So one of the challenges we've talked about before is that Idaho Power has built and developed all of our remote generators, and there's not really anywhere that you can go to go buy an off-the-shelf generator. So, I mean, there's just a number of challenges that, we are going to face in the state of Idaho with expanding ground operations. So my second recommendation for you all to consider would be to develop an extension of the Idaho Collaborative Cloud Seeding Program. So we've obviously seen that there's opportunity to share our infrastructure with the Upper Snake Basin, and developing an extension of the collaborative is honestly what provides the only mechanism for us to share that infrastructure. So it's not really operationally or cost efficient or very feasible to have 2 separate operators operating in one basin. And so really, if we do want to share an aircraft and support both basins, it's probably going to have to be through an extension of the collaborative. The other benefit to that is that it's not going to require a lengthy procurement process. We, through the collaborative, have multiple funding sources throughout the state, and we have been given the ability to not go through some of those lengthy procurement requirements simply because we have so many different vested water users and folks paying into this program. And so not having to go through procurement is a huge step, because that can take, as you're aware, 6 months to a year or more. So that's a big step for us. Additionally, most of the necessary operational framework already exists. So you're well aware we've invested in a lot of the cloud seeding model, the hydrologic model, the riverware model. We have a number of different weather instruments throughout the state of Idaho that support our operations. We have operational teams and planning in place to support our regions. All of these things we would have to basically consider starting over with if we were to go with another operator or another route. And so that's, definitely something to consider, that, all of the models, the infrastructure, everything that we have invested in, all of that framework is there. So yet another reason why I would recommend considering an extension of the collaborative cloud seeding program. And then lastly, once you conduct a pilot project, well, what does that mean? You have to collect that data and assess whether or not it's really cost efficient. And so my last recommendation for you all would be, following this 5-year pilot project, to conduct a validation study. So many other states are in the process of doing this right now, starting new cloud seeding programs, developing pilot projects, and conducting validation assessments. And so that is definitely something that we would want to do to answer this question. One, well, NCAR told us that we have these opportunities, but have we seen them the last year? Have these been realized the last 5 years? What is the estimated effects of seeding in the basin? It's really hard to say without operational data, and 1 year of operational data cannot answer that question. So conducting a project validation study will evaluate that data and help us to say what those estimated effects are. And ultimately, it will help us to answer this question of, will this project sufficiently support the long-term water management goals in the basin? So factoring all these things, Mr. Chairman, I've put together some rough costs for you. There's definitely some swag going on in these numbers. I'm going to say that right out front. But what we've estimated roughly, and some of this is based on what we pay for our existing collaborative program costs that are just transferred over to us. Aircraft for 1 year, just one aircraft, is roughly about $675,000. And again, this is for a larger caliber an aircraft with the twin turbo or multiple engine, as well as a second flight crew member. This is also costs that we will have to include is a contract meteorologist. So as you're aware, we have a meteorology team that guides our operations. The bigger your operations get, the bigger your meteorological staff have to get. And so we will have to contract a meteorologist. And this would be done through our subcontract or through Idaho Power's subcontract with our aircraft operator. Some additional costs would be for Idaho Power's contract administration. So again, they maintain a subcontract with the aircraft operator. There is costs that they incur for the administration of that contract. And so those are costs that would have to be considered if they were to operate this aircraft for us. So 800,000 roughly is what we're estimating ballpark for one aircraft, the contract meteorologist, and to administer. If we were to want to also ask Idaho Power about using the generators that exist in the Upper Snake Basin to share infrastructure with the Bear, based on NCAR's evaluation, the nice thing is all those generators are in place. All those generators are already being maintained. The only additional costs really are going to be in the solution and the operational time. So they're fairly minimal cost to operate the existing generators. These numbers are probably pretty high, but about 20,000 is what we've guesstimated just for solution to support additional operations in the Bear. The third consideration, Mr. Chairman, as you're aware, is we need weather instruments on the ground to provide weather and data to guide our operations. And so if we're going to grow and expand in this basin, we're certainly going to have to grow some of our weather instrumentation. And that is actually something that we have entered a contract with NCAR to help us evaluate, not just for the Bear River Basin, but statewide. Where are data gaps? Where do we need more weather and information to support our operations, as well as some of the analyses that we're doing, right? We definitely still need a lot more data for our analyses. So to wrap this up, Mr. Chairman, the overall estimated costs, again, these are pretty swagged for you. Looking at a 5-year pilot project, if we were to move forward with this, year one would be our implementation. Again, just for the aircraft and use of Idaho Power's existing generators, there's not a lot of infrastructure costs, so we would just be looking at the operation of the aircraft for about 800,000 and about 20,000 for that solution, total of 820. And then we would have capital. The capital costs would be for weather instrumentation. And the big ticket item for that one is a radiometer. It's a fairly expensive device. And so that's largely what this cost is. And we would just see that this initial year. So years 2 to 4 during the pilot project, we would just have operational costs of, roughly 800 or so thousand a year. Idaho Power's existing aircraft contract to maintain our aircraft requires a 5% annual increase. So there is inflationary costs baked into the contract. And then there's also obviously economic inflationary costs that we will experience over the next several years too. So again, these are fairly estimated, but roughly 800,000 for years 2 to 4 for a total of 2.5 million. So then year 5, we would want to run operations that final year. It's 880 this year because I've added some of those inflationary costs. And then we would want to conduct the project validation assessment. And again, this cost is a very rough estimate. This could go up or down quite significantly, really depending on the level of detail. And honestly, Mr. Chairman, with regard to the assessment, the science and the speed of technology is moving so fast right now. That our ability to evaluate these programs could drastically change in 5 years. And so I'm basing some of these costs based on, what our current efforts are to conduct some of these assessments. But again, that could go up or down depending on the level of detail. So final year, we'd be looking about a little over $1 million for a total investment of the pilot project for the 5 years of 4.75 million. And then if you round in the feasibility study that we've already done and the 1-year pilot project, that would be a total of about $5.5 million that you all would spend in the Bear River Basin for cloud seeding over a 6-year period, factoring the first year and the 5 years proposed. So, Mr. Chairman, that is the last slide that I have for you all, and I will stand for questions before passing off to Jonathan on Utah.
Okay, any questions for Kayla? Brian, then Al.
Mr. Chairman, Kayla, So in the Upper Snake, we've had quite a few years of experience and I know the, cost and the estimated gain in water supply. It balances out at, $3 to $5 per acre foot. I mean, pretty cheap water to you. You can't really make that determination on the bear yet, but do you anticipate that the water could be fairly inexpensive? I mean, I'm saying $5 an acre foot is really inexpensive in today's world, but do you have that kind of an estimate at all?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Olmstead, the way that I would probably answer that is to say that, industry-wide, I think it's reasonable. Most of us feel that it's reasonable to assume that a scientifically based and a well-managed program can reasonably provide an output of about 5 to 10% annual increase in precipitation. Yes, I am well aware, that there's a lot of, science and research still going on to validate those estimates. But, translating that to a 5%, 5 to 10% increase in precipitation, obviously we know not all of that ends up in water in the stream. But it could end up being a reasonable supply of water for the Bear River Basin. And when you look at the cost of what we're proposing for this aircraft and the range, of what we're seeing, yes, I would say to answer on a high level, we know cloud seeding puts water on the ground. We know that a good project can reasonably maintain 5 to 10% output from what we've seen across all programs. And we've seen, based on our feasibility and design study, similar results to some of our other basins based on the modeling simulations that we've done. And so I think the answer to that question is yes, absolutely. And it's like I like to tell folks here in Idaho, even if Idaho Power's estimates of our volume are off by a magnitude of 50%, and we're looking at $7 to $10 an acre foot, that is still a pretty cheap water, at least from my understanding here. So yeah, long and short, to answer your question, I definitely think it's still a very cheap source of water for us in this basin.
Okay, any other questions, Al?
Mr. Chairman, Taylor, could you back up a slide to the totals? Yeah, one before that. So, are you in this proposal contemplating that the aircraft would be used for both the Upper Snake and the Bear?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Barker, that is correct. And the benefit of this would be that you all would get to choose which region to prioritize with that aircraft.
So how do we know what region to prioritize? I mean, isn't that what NCAR is telling us, is that we could use it under certain conditions?
That is,
some conditions we use it for the Upper Snake.
To clarify your region, right?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Barker, to answer that. So sometimes there's opportunities for seeding in only the Snake. Sometimes the weather supports both basins, and sometimes it only supports the Bear. And sometimes there's gray area in between. And so because these are such large basins and large areas, we can't reasonably cover with one aircraft or even two, honestly, all of the areas where we see seeding opportunities. So at some point, when we're conducting operations where you're sharing an aircraft and you have a meteorologist who's sitting there at the computer and they're like, well, it's 50-50, we got good opportunities in the Bear, we got good opportunities in the Snake, and which one do we prioritize? And so that's where, prioritization of these basins comes in, because, there's a range of benefit. And so really it's kind of up to us to determine what our objective here is, what we want to, where we want to target the opportunities. If we're seeing more opportunities in the Upper Snake and only a little bit of opportunity in the Bear, but we really want to seed in the Bear, is that cost efficient? Maybe not, but we want to prioritize the Bear. And so that's why I say, it gives us some leverage to decide really, which region that we want to prioritize, because it provides infrastructure to support both.
So this 800,000, we don't know if that's attributable to the Bear or to the ESBA until we decide how to actually spend it.
So the costs are strictly tied to the aircraft. Where you choose to use it is up to us. Yes.
I'm gonna interrupt and I'm gonna get to T. I mean, the 675 would be the cost that you would allocate between the two basins. You gotta have the contract meteorologist, really, you use the aircraft half the time or all the time.
Correct.
The same. So, it'd be how we apportion the 675, and I suppose that would be something you would kind of have to do after the fact, after you've seen the flight hours between the two basins.
Yeah, typically, how we split the costs with our other shared aircraft, if we are wanting to split these costs for this aircraft, is there's fixed costs, and there's variable costs. So typically we 50-50 on the fixed costs because those are the same. Those are the costs to keep the aircraft grounded and on standby. And then the variable costs are generally split per basin. So if the variable costs are kind of in a gray area where, we're seating the region, they're split equally. If some of those specific flight or seating hours are more specific to the Boise Basin versus the Wood Basin, for example, then the variable costs or those flight hours get charged to the respective basin where the aircraft flew. So they split the fixed costs, and variable is attributed to operations specific to that basin.
So have you coordinated these cost estimates and this proposal with Idaho Power yet? Because they're gonna have to be involved in this.
I have not. Their staff have provided these costs to us as a courtesy, but our staff have not started discussing what those cost shares might look like.
Question.
Oh, Jeff, Dean, you're okay. Dale?
Gail, where would this aircraft be located? Would it be in Boise or Idaho Falls?
So that is a question that we would ultimately, I think, put on our operator. So we've looked at potentially stationing another aircraft in Pocatello. There could also be operational efficiency with putting the aircraft in Logan. Currently, our Upper Snake aircraft are based out of Pocatello. It sounds like in my initial conversations with our aircraft operator that that's probably a little bit better because of some of the services for the aircraft there at the airport. But those are the two airports that were being considered right now.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Kayla? Okay, I'm thinking the next step would be is for the cloud seeding committee to meet and review this and make a recommendation and bring back to the board. And I'm sure the cloud seeding committee chairman will be very fair and equitable in his discussions and recommendations on how to allocate the aircraft. Okay?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
I've been sitting on my hands over here, but, this is a project that's near and dear to my heart, and when we did that feasibility study, there were some issues like those 4 generators that Idaho Power now has that are on the Salt River Divide. 2 of those help, I think, regardless which way the wind's blowing in the Bear. But there's so many similarities to that divide that I just think this is an opportunity that we need to pursue. And obviously, as chairman of the Cloud Seeding Committee, I'm more than happy to work on this with making the statement that I also realize that I may have a selfish motive, but the bear is if you see one side of that the divide, it helps the state. If you're the other side, it helps the bear. So a lot of times the airplane can do both sides at the same time. So I'm interested in pursuing this on behalf of the Cloud Seeding Committee.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gibbs. Okay, Mr. Jennings, are you gonna present now? Is that what we're doing, Kayla?
That is correct. Jonathan is here sitting right next to me in the room, and I'm going to turn things over to him to walk you through Utah's cloud seeding.
Okay, he would rather be in Boise than in Soda Springs. Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks for being here.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. I'm currently in Boise for the Mountain Meteorology Conference, which is hosted by the American Meteorological Society. I would have hoped y'all would have gave us a little bit better weather this week. It's been really hot and, of course, smoky. But today I'm going to give a presentation on cloud seeding operations in Utah, what's been going on the last few years and what we have ahead of us. Just a quick background on me. I've been in Utah for about 7 months now. I come from West Texas, where I conducted and managed cloud seeding operations on convective clouds all across the state of Texas and in parts of eastern New Mexico. So I did that for the better part of the last 13 years. And I'm also the current president of the Weather Modification Association. All right, so to give you a little history of cloud seeding in Utah, that is where things have started, right there in that Winnebago with the old radar on top. The first operational program in Utah started in 1974. Our primary contractor is with North American Weather Consultants, which is based out of Sandy, Utah, which is in the Salt Lake Valley. They are operated with 3 meteorologists. All 3 of them have certifications from the Weather Modification Association and also are certified consulting meteorologists with the AMS. Interestingly enough, one of the first programs by NOC was in 1953 in southeastern Idaho with the Salmon River Canal Company, Oakley Canal Company, and the Cedar Mesa Reservoir and Canal Company. All the operations that were taking place across the U.S. Resulted in the Utah Cloud Seeding Act of 1973, which gave legislative authority to the Division of Water Resources to license and permit cloud seeding operations. We've had some amendments to that Cloud Seeding Act, but it's still how we operate and license and permit the operational programs. The state has been doing matching funding since 1976, but of course in 2023 we saw a large increase in that funding. So here's a look at the funding, and you can see the gray areas is where the local support came in, and then blue is for the state. Back in 2008, the lower Colorado River Basin states started to provide funding to extend cloud seeding operations and also expand supporting the Colorado River Basin. But really, the big reason for the increase in funding in 2023 was for efforts towards refurbishing the Great Salt Lake. We all know what's going on with the Great Salt Lake after the historic low that was met back in 2022. But the main priority of this funding is to expand our generator network. So we have 160 manual ground-based generators, but we need people to work those generators. So we can't get them in more remote areas. So we have been building these remote generators that could go pretty much anywhere as long as we get permission for land use. And the meteorologist in the office could just hit a button to turn the generator on and hit the button to turn it off. Funding has also gone towards a feasibility study for the Ogden and Provo areas where cloud seeding operations are not ongoing. But the Utah Climate Center did just give us that report and showed that the Ogden area is very feasible for cloud seeding operations. So we are going to extend the Northern Utah program down towards Ogden all the way to Farmington, which sits just north of Salt Lake. Our aerial program is only 2 years old, so we're still in exploratory phase, but that was a big part of the increase in funding. We're learning a lot over these past 2 years, and we're starting to make some decisions on how to move forward with the aerial program. And then the biggest thing is doing research that can evaluate our programs, give us a better understanding of the water production, but also research to aid operations. There's a lot of research that is going on to only do research, but we are most interested in optimizing our operational practices. So here's a great map of the state of Utah and the cloud seeding operations that are ongoing. So the blue area, that's the Southern and Central program. That's the one that's been going on since 1974. So we have a rich history and tradition of cloud seeding operations there. Embedded in that, you can see the gray area. That's the Emery County Water Conservancy District. They do liquid propane seeding, actually. So that's something that is of great interest to many in the cloud seeding community. However, we don't have a whole lot of data just yet for how well they've done, but the operator down there is very optimistic about all the work they've been doing for the last several decades. We also have the Six Creeks program, which sits right there at the base of the Wasatch Front and just to the south of Salt Lake City. And then we have the programs covered, the Uintas, the High Uinta program and the Western Uinta program. And most notably, the Northern Utah program, which is there in just outside of Logan to the west, and then also all the way out in the western parts of Box Elder County. Again, 160 manual generators. We did deploy 24 state-owned remote generators last season, and we're hoping to get closer towards 60 this coming year. So we're really excited about what's been happening in Utah and how we can move forward with this additional funding. So to give you an idea of the different sponsors that are involved in all of our programs. So what happens is North American Weather Consultants contracts with the sponsor, and then the state of Utah comes in and provides a 50-50 match. And you can see how they're affiliated with the different programs. The Utah Climate Center has been great over the last several years doing modeling studies for us, feasibility studies, and we have one really exciting modeling study that's just now getting started. And also Radiometrics is a partner. They're going to be giving us 3 radiometers this season, which was purchased using money from the USBR grant that was passed through the Southern Nevada Water Authority to aid the Colorado River Basin. Regulatory, we do have the Cloud Seeding Act of 1973. So we do require all of our operators to have a license. In order to obtain a license, you have to have a Bachelor of Science in Meteorology or a related field, and at least 5 years of cloud seeding experience. We are looking at adding some more criteria there to vet the process a little bit more and get better meteorologists in place, although NOC already has a meteorologist that have all the certifications that we would be looking for. In order to obtain a permit, you have to provide us with an operations plan. You have to run a notice of intention in the local newspapers, show proof of financial responsibility, and also abide by the reporting requirements that the state of Utah requires, but also the federal government with NOAA. We do look at making these permits multi-year like other states. I know Texas has a 4-year permit process, which takes away some of the paperwork and allows for a little better consistency with the work that's ongoing. Right now, we do have suspension criteria in place, which includes excess snowpack accumulations, rain-induced winter floods, severe weather, which can become an issue when it comes to flood warnings, but also severe thunderstorm warnings where during those the ends of the season, the start and the finish of the season, where we could get some convective activity. Water Resources in Utah does have a suspension criteria where we're looking at the 95th percentile of spring runoff. So we keep track of the correlations between April 1st SWE or any first of the month SWE and how that correlates to spring runoff. And of course, we have to always worry about avalanche considerations, especially with how much recreation is ongoing, especially there in the Wasatch Front. But the great thing about having local sponsors is that we get input from those local folks. Weather stations, snowtel sites, those could be few and far between. So having actual people call in, let us know what their conditions are like is very helpful as we go through a winter season. So, of course, one of the biggest things of interest in cloud seeding is how it works. But, of course, that's one of the hardest things to show. NOC has been doing target and control statistical evaluations of cloud seeding operations for the better part of 20 plus years. And the long-term averages are about a 6 to 11% increase in snowpack. We've done some studies that show a conservative stream flow evaluation of about 200,000 acre feet of additional stream flow a year. And if you value an acre foot of water at about $100, which is pretty low, you see a cost benefit return of about $20 million. But of course, we want to do some modeling and look at the statistical evaluations and kind of confirm what we're seeing. So we are in discussion with NCAR of doing a WRF weather mod study. The WRF model, the Weather Research Forecast model, does undershoot precipitation quite a bit. So their numbers are going to be on the conservative side, which is good. We would rather have more realistic conservative numbers than overshooting. But when it comes to cloud seeding, you can't think of just stream flow. You have to look at reservoir recharge, agricultural support, drought and wildfire mitigation, ecosystem health that goes towards increasing carbon capture, and of course aiding recreational activities, which is really big in Utah. So as we move forward, we have a short-term strategy in place, and this was presented to our leadership about a month ago. We're going to continue the remote generator expansion. We're hoping to get about 120 in the field within the next 2 years. The Utah Climate Center is doing a high-resolution rapid refresh model project where we're taking a 3-kilometer grid model and squeezing it down to a 1-kilometer scale. And then also in that model, you have 30 vertical levels. We're going to squeeze all those vertical levels to the lowest kilometer, and we'll really start to be able to see the terrain impacts on the weather. So we're really excited about that project. It's just now getting started, and we believe we'll have an exploratory model ready by November 1st. We're going to continue to review our aerial programs, which has had some challenges, especially in northern Utah. I'll get into that later. And we're also looking at extending and expanding the northern Utah program. We've already talked about expanding it down to the Ogden area, but the sponsors only have the funding available to continue that program through the end of March. So the state's going to jump in and we'll extend that program through the end of April because a lot of that water has major impacts on the Great Salt Lake. We're also looking at funding an environmental study, looking at the impacts of silver iodide on the environment. There's been a lot of really great literature already out there, but having a study done in your own backyard carries a lot more weight with your local folks. Again, I mentioned the radiometers. Censoring is a big issue that we have in Utah. We don't have great radar coverage. We don't have radiometers in place. We're going to fix that. We're going to increase the coverage of icing rate meters. Right now, we're pretty much using UDOT cameras for a lot of our operations, which is where the gap filling radar project comes into play. So those orange circles on the side are the current radars that are used in Utah. So that's the Salt Lake, Cedar City, and Grand Junction radars. But we deal with in the wintertime a lot of overshooting where the radars are so far away, they're either getting blocked by terrain or they're overshooting the more shallow orographic clouds. And we don't see anything. So I've been working with 2 different companies, the Western Water and Weather Intelligence Center. They're a nonprofit group out of Colorado. And this is what they do. Public-private partnerships trying to bring affordable solutions to water and weather issues in the Western states. On August 15th, they're going to dedicate their first radar in Gunnison, Colorado. So I'm really excited to see how that works. And then there's a second company called Climavision. Now they're just plowing through the whole U.S. installing these gap filling radars. Not as much flexibility with them, and they're very, very expensive compared to W3IC. But they are a sure thing. They have a great track record, really good team in place. So I'm still working with both of these companies trying to figure out what is the best solution for us in Utah. And then going back, transparency is huge in Utah. We've done, I believe, a really good job of being transparent with what we're doing. And of course, you put out a social media post, you're going to get the 1% of the loud public coming out and speaking against cloud seeding with little understanding, but it's worth taking those lumps in order to continue educating the rest of the folks. And sometimes you could turn some of the naysayers into believers just by having a simple conversation with them. We have a really good PR team at the Division of Water Resources, and they've been aiding me in that campaign. And I would say it's working very well. We're going to continue working with the Weather Modification Association I'm the president of, and the North American Weather Modification Council, which Jake Saraga, who's there today, is the president of. And we're really going to take on this PR issue that we have in cloud seeding and make sure people understand what cloud seeding is and what it isn't. I think that's one of the biggest issues we're having is what is not cloud seeding. So looking at the long-term solution, we are in the process of creating a cloud seeding research advisory committee. We would like to bring some of the experts in and give us opinions on some of the research proposals that we're getting and aid us in the ability to make these decisions. Utah understands we have a great, we have a lot of pressure on us to get this right because what we do in Utah is going to impact what happens in our neighboring states, but also we want to be ambassadors for the science, for the cloud seeding world. So this research advisory committee is going to provide that for us and give us some more credibility when we do some of our research projects. Additional feasibility is something that our leadership is very interested in. We're looking at convective feasibility studies, which early on, especially across northern Utah, is just not looking good, just not enough opportunities, not enough moisture in place. But during the monsoon season for the southern half of the state, that might be a different story. We're looking at different seeding agents. So, I've been working with Kayla on the side, trying to figure out how Utah could get involved with the liquid propane study that's going to be conducted here in Idaho. But also hygroscopic seeding, which is more of a convective material, but you don't need to have the super cold liquid water in a cloud for condensation to occur. So this could be a way of seeding clouds that are warmer than that -5, -6 that we're usually looking for with glaciogenic seeding. And then a multi-year field research campaign where we're looking at targeting and dosaging of material, generator density and placement, and of course, evaluations. So going back to what Kayla was talking about is the Bear River Basin. This is obviously a very important part of the world for the Great Salt Lake. Much of the water that goes into the Great Salt Lake comes from the Bear River Basin. And we actually have under contract with NOC the ability to extend into Idaho with your permission. We're looking at 6 different generators, and interestingly enough, they were placed very similar to the design and feasibility project that was given to Idaho from NCAR. Not as expansive, but we have ways to increase this, but NOC is very interested in moving in there, and so is the state of Utah. So kind of a proposal from Utah side of things is looking at this in a 3-phased approach where we're able to bring in groups C and D in year 1. That's a total of 10 generators. See how things go in that year, and then bring in groups A and B in year 2. This map doesn't show E and F, but that was kind of on the northeast portions of the basin. We could bring those in during year 3 and then have a full project in place for the Bear River Basin. But of course, the further southeast, you have those other groups, K and I. Well, those are pretty much already in place. So this map here is showing all the different generators that are in Utah right now. And the Western Uinta program, those generators are there. That's the shaded in the purple. Those generators in that area are there to really deal with any type of westerly or northwesterly winds to aid the Uinta programs. But we could target different wind fields with those generators, and they're very similar to what was proposed by NCAR. And something to note, our remote generators that are being built by NOC right now are mobile. They're on trailers. So if we need to adjust some of our siting placements, we can do that. We don't have an aerial component in place. And part of that is the remote generators we have can be used in aggressive terrain at much higher elevations. This is a more cost-effective solution. We have better and ongoing or constant dispersion of seeding material. But the Northern Utah program has exposed some issues. We have aggressive icing conditions, which is obviously an issue. We have limited ability to shed ice. We have very poor ground conditions in Logan, so the ability to launch and recover becomes pretty hard. So we've had a lot of safety issues, a lot of missed opportunities because of this. But some of these struggles might be minimized by working out of a different airport or using different aircraft. We're just really learning a lot with our aerial programs right now. So there has to be a lot more discussions that take place before we start expanding our aerial program at all. So that's all I have right now, but I hope I left some questions for everybody, and I'm available to take those now.
Hey, Joanne.
Mr. Chair. Where your stations are mobile, do you have, how does the land lease work? Do you have to lease the land for a mobile station, or how do you arrange where they can be?
Yeah, so fortunately, we have a great group of folks that are open to having these generators on their private land. But we're also working with state lands, and we're able to get out there. We just need to have a permit in place. And North American Weather Consultants has done a great job obtaining those permits. And we're starting to get more multi-year permits. They're also working with the National Forest to get some generators out there, but there's some restrictions, but they've been willing to talk to us. So right now, we're most focused on state land and private land.
You bet.
A follow-up question, are they more easy to work with where the stations are mobile than if they were fixed?
Having the mobility allows for maintenance during the off season. So we've actually taken all the generators back to a facility to do additional maintenance and make adjustments. But also if we have siting issues, if we think we put one in a great spot based on models, but then we're not getting a whole lot of use out of it, we're able to use it. But having it more mobile, once they're there and the winter comes in, they become immobile at that point because they're hard to access. And that's the whole point. We're able to get these in areas that are inaccessible during the winter.
Dean, Mr. Chair, are you able to get these mobile generators up to the high enough elevations to maximize their abilities? I mean, as I recall, don't the mobile generators have to be fairly high elevations? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's great. The great thing is we could hook these up to a snowmobile even and get them up even higher. So we have plenty of generators above 8,500 feet right now. And we're going to be putting some closer to 10,000 feet this winter in northern Utah.
Okay. Other questions? Al?
Jonathan, or Mr. Chairman, thank you. Jonathan. You said you've been working with Forest Service. Is there some kind of NEPA procedure that they make you go through for each individual siting, or is there some kind of comprehensive NEPA process?
Yeah, there is a process in place. We have not been successful of getting anything on federal land just yet, but all that is being conducted by the contractor. So I would have to reach out and get better information from our contractor on that.
And these generators that you acquired, do they belong to the contractor, or do you buy them from the contractor?
These all belong to the state of Utah. We are funding the building of them, so they're all state property, not property of the contractor. The seeding material and that stuff is property of the contractor, but the generators themselves are the state's.
Brian, I can't remember, did you say how many of the generators were propane and how many were silver iodide? And the effectiveness on any research on the effectiveness of the propane?
Yeah, so the 160 manual generators we have are all silver iodide, and the 24 and soon to be 60 remote generators will also all be silver iodide. Only the one program, which is funded by themselves, the Emery County Water Conservancy District, they're the only ones with liquid propane generators, and I believe they have 8 of them. They do some targeted control evaluations showing about an 8% increase, which is right in the middle of what we're seeing with the silver iodide programs. But we're really interested in learning more about it because the dispersion rate is one of the biggest questions. That's the great thing about silver iodide, is it disperses quite wide and far, but with liquid propane, it comes out almost like a jet. It's a really quick release, and we don't know how much mixing is actually happening. So that's why the state of Utah is also interested in liquid propane research that's going to be happening here in Idaho.
Okay. Any other questions, board members? James Seplow, Regional Manager.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jennings, I noticed that there were a couple sites in the state of Wyoming, and I imagine there's an agreement with those individual property owners, but I also was wondering the nature of the agreement between the state of Utah and the state of Wyoming. Do the two Department of Natural Resources have a separate agreement on those sites?
Oh, that's a great question. I wonder if Jake Sarago could get up and answer that one on my behalf. I'm not aware of that agreement.
Yeah, so we work with Kayla to follow the same process of getting approval. So we have to submit a map for where the generators are, a plan for the winter season for how they'll be operated, and then Kayla, goes through the process to grant permission.
For Idaho.
Right.
But what about Wyoming? You do the same thing in Wyoming?
No, because we only do it for where we have generators in the state boundary. So up until the previous years, we only had, I think, 2 generators that were just inside the Idaho boundary, but we don't have.
You don't have any in Wyoming?
That's a good question. We actually do have some, but we've never got to.
I would be uncomfortable having Kayla approve your generator.
So one good thing is that the cloud seeding community is fairly small. So, I interact with Kayla quite a bit at conferences and meetings, and same for the folks in Wyoming.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just been, that's been the process.
Okay. That answer your question, James? Okay. Anything else? Okay, Jonathan, thank you very much. We apologize for the high temperatures in Boise. Gonna blame most of the smoke on Oregon.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. Next up, Jake, Utah water resource issues.
Right, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Thank you for the invitation to come here to present on this. I'm going to talk about some general things about conditions of Great Salt Lake and how state of Utah views those, and then about the plan that we're developing to help address some of the problems that we'll face. I always enjoy traveling to Utah. Traveling up to Idaho, so I'm glad I could come here. I really appreciate how Idaho seems to maintain vibrant open space and farmland. There's a lot of farmland getting eaten up in Utah, so I appreciate coming up here and seeing that. I'm an engineer. I work in the hydrology and modeling group at the Division of Water Resources, and so I've worked with several people in this group, and on the Bear River Commission Technical Advisory Committee, and worked with Connolly and Dave Kokema, Matt and others on the Bear Lake evaluation of alternative operations, flood operations at Bear Lake. And then some of these things have been, I think Don mentioned this, I've, prior to coming to the division, I worked internationally with Central South American governments, and then I've also worked with some other states. And what we have here is really quite unique in terms of the level of collaboration and cooperation and amicability. And so it's nothing to be, take for granted. So I guess that's why I'm grateful that you invited me to come here and talk about these things. So. Okay, so take it going slow. Okay, here's a view from space I like because one, it shows the curvature of the Earth. So some people seem to think it's not round anymore, and that's interesting. And then I like that you can see the Great Salt Lake hydrologic basin, and looks somewhat small from space. You can see here we all are together living peacefully. You can't tell if there are any arguments or disagreements or adjudications, you can't tell that from up here. You can't see any boundaries. There's a lot of things you learn. I also think it's fascinating, you see this kind of the Great American Desert out to the west, and this kind of oasis area, just how kind of unique and verdant and vibrant this small area is. You can see Utah Lake to the south. You can see Bear Lake here, a little under the clouds. You can see Strawberry Reservoir, which is in the Colorado River Basin, which is used to divert water over into the Provo River drainage basin. And then you can see Great Salt Lake and in context with former Lake Bonneville. I'm not sure in Idaho, but in Utah, they love Diet Coke. And so that means they actually love Great Salt Lake, because Great Salt Lake produces a lot of products. One of those is magnesium, which I believe is the only national source of magnesium. And so magnesium goes into making these cans where people enjoy their pretty good choice. Brine shrimp is a huge farming industry on Great Salt Lake, and that forms part of the global food web. So those brine shrimp cysts are harvested, shipped all around the world for used in aquaculture where they grow these larger shrimp that you may enjoy. And then potassium sulfate is a big product that's extracted from the lake, and that is shipped as well all around the country to farmlands for fertilizer. Recently, there's been a lot of interest in the lithium available from the lake, and so we have a lot of companies who are coming and trying to extract and make proposals to extract lithium so it can be used in batteries that everyone wants to use. This is a study, a table. You can just kind of focus on the activities, recreation, mineral activity, brine shrimp harvesting, and these are numbers in millions of dollars. So the overall economic activity is valued at $1.3 billion per year. And then there's a number of sort of non-monetary values that come from this. You know, there's millions of birds and multiple different species that come. It's a real ecological sort of miracle. And it's really beautiful to go out to the lake and experience these open spaces, experience these wetlands, experience the vast amounts of birds. And as the largest saline lake in the Western Hemisphere, it forms a critical part of the ecosystem. And as other lakes have dried up around the West, especially in the US and Central America, the Great Salt Lake becomes more and more important for a lot of these species. And as Utah has dried up some of its wetlands around the state, 80% of those wetlands are on the shores of Great Salt Lake. So this shows, this graphic shows elevation of Great Salt Lake over time. And then laid behind it is these colored bands, which indicate sort of a level of health for the ecology and for the economy of the lake. So you can see in 2021, 22, we started to fall down here in this red zone in which we had a lot of adverse and potential adverse conditions. Fortunately, we had 2 wet years, which raised the lake. But you know, without those wet years, we could easily have sunk below and kept setting new historic low levels. So that's part of the concern. This gives you an aerial representation of that graph, which shows the high point, which is not a normal elevation of the lake in the 80s, and then that decline over time. This graphic shows you a similar lake, the Arrow Sea, which was at one time the 3rd largest inland water body in the world, and how where that lake was in the 60s, and how after large-scale Soviet Union irrigation projects upstream began diverting water away for agriculture, you can see that decline. And in the 2000s, I think this is in Uzbekistan, they created a diking project to try to save this part of the lake and the north part. And this is really, they call this a desert now. So it's totally transformed. So going into potential problems, the Great Salt Lake is part of the global food web. It's a national mineral supply chain, hemispherical flyway of great importance. It's also important to regional health because of potential dust impacts, because of some unknowns about mineral collection at the bottom of the lake and how those toxic metals could be entrained in dust. The basin hydrology, because of what it produces for the humidity around the area, and agriculture, what it produces for lake effect snow in the Uintas. And then these I may consider real problems. These are obviously very real, but also looming. And that is the risk of federal intervention for issues such as Endangered Species Act, public trust, and dust. And these top 2 are we're already seeing that. So there was a petition to list Wilson's phalarope, which is now going through the federal process. And then several groups brought a public trust lawsuit against the Utah Department of Natural Resources. So we're in the middle of negotiating that. So these are no longer looming threats, but actually, imminent threats. And this would create a whole world of trouble where we can no longer, determine for ourselves what is important, no longer determine for ourselves how we want to, distribute water, how we want to manage our resource. So that's something we would really like to avoid. And so part of why, all these problems kind of got to where they were is that there is no water resources plan for the Great Salt Lake Basin. When I first started on this, in my naivete, I thought, well, that's kind of silly. Why didn't they do that before? And I'll get into, after being involved now, I'm aware of why it was never done. So we'll get into some of that. And so, as you know, water resources in the Bear River Basin have been stressed. They've been stressed throughout the entire Great Salt Lake Basin. Fortunately for us, our water, our system of reservoirs and water management is really world class, so that those stresses are actually not felt to the full extent by most water users or municipalities. Those stresses actually are seen most acutely at the lake and the wetlands. So that's where, stress has come, and our water system has allowed us to enjoy a certain level of reliability, but parts of the watershed have suffered. So there's no shared vision for the future in Utah, let alone with Wyoming and Idaho. And surprisingly, can be a lot of argument when I talk to all my friends in the city, at the farmers market. They all say, well, the problem is the farmers. Actually, they're the ones that are taking all the water. When I talk to the farmers, they say, well, I just been doing the same thing that my grandfather's been doing. It's all the new people who moved in, that. And so that's there's little consensus. It results in some impetuous decision making where, we may see one avenue to a solution, but in the end, that could cause consequences that we don't actually want because it's not well thought out. And so part of the reason why there's no water resources plan for the basin, the pink line delineates the full watershed for Great Salt Lake. This is a map that the Utah Division of Water Resources produces. All the black is just kind of open lands where the colors indicate use where water is used by mankind. And so the watershed is quite large, 36,000 square miles. It crosses 4 states, 18 different counties, 141 cities. And Utah has 71 different groundwater aquifer systems. And some of these are just in Utah. Over 1,300 reservoirs, 150,000 water rights. There are more than 2.5 million humans. There's a lot of farmland, urban acres, wetlands, and for all those humans, you have a range of different behaviors, attitudes, and values. So that makes planning complicated. But we finally got it going. We received $5 million from the Utah legislature, and then we got support from that through the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation's Basic Study Program. So we have a good amount of money that will allow us to conduct a study. The partners who are involved in this are, of course, the project team, mostly from Utah Water Resources, but also the Department of Natural Resources, the Great Salt Lake Commissioner. This was created 2 years ago in the Utah legislature, and this actually provides some leadership that was also missing. So one reason we didn't have a plan before was there was no leadership saying, hey, let's create a plan for the basin. Advisory group, which is comprised of federal and state agencies, and I've listed IDWR here because I met with Ms. Cynthia Bridge, Amy Kessel, right? And this is a great area where you all could plug in to interact with sister agencies and stay informed and be involved. Amy actually came out. We did a tour of farming today. It was good to get to know her better. Steering committee, which provides guidance on the study. So Connolly is on the steering committee. Trevor Nielsen from the Bear River Canal Company is on the steering committee. Several other water interests, water users. watershed councils, which started up in Utah. And then a list of water users. Obviously, the large number of water users prevents us from interacting with all of them. But we have a list of about 100 of the largest water right holders in Utah that will be working through this plan. The project manager is Laura Vernon. Contact information is in the slides, which will distribute these in my contact information. So overall, the goal of this plan is to provide basically a roadmap that can give that so that we can develop a resilient water system, resilient to changing water demands, resilient to changing climate for both Great Salt Lake and the water users in the basin. Here's the timeline. We expect this, I put this here because it looks good, but it will probably be done around 2027, 2028. And these are the basic steps that we'll be following through the planning process. So one, make sure that we can represent the existing conditions with a model. The model is helpful because it allows us to, we can make all kinds of changes that aren't expensive or that aren't permanent. And so use that existing conditions model to look at plausible future conditions, come up with management solutions, and then look at how those impact water users, how those impact the lake, and others, and then do this process until we come up with a strategy that we all agreed upon. So going into the existing conditions, just quickly to show you, we currently have models of all the major river basins in the lake. There's the Weber River, the Bear River, which is this model was developed with Idaho Water Resources, Pacific Corps, Utah Water Resources. We have model with the Jordan River, of the Provo Utah Lake watershed. We have a model that represents wetlands and water use around the Great Salt Lake, and then we have a water and salt balance model of Great Salt Lake. So putting these all together allows us to get the full picture for the watershed. And then once we have that tool, we can go in and explore certain things. So this is a graphic just demonstrating a hydrograph that shows the water supply, that green, compared to water demand in yellow, and that kind of unnatural offset is where we see we want to use more water in the summer, but we don't actually have water in the summer in the streams, so we build reservoirs. And then those dashed lines show how that could change. The dashed orange line shows how demand could increase in time. The dotted line increases how the runoff hydrograph could change depending on the climate in the future. And so these are the kinds of things we can look at. What if the climate is drier? What if it's wetter? What if it's hot? What if we get earlier snow? What if the snow accumulation season is shorter? What if we get more rain instead of snow? So these are the types of things we can put in to the whole system model and look at how our reservoirs change, how the lake change, how water users experience shortages. Then we can go in and look at solutions that groups could come up with. And these are just some possibilities and things that we've looked at in other river basins. So we can look at reducing or increasing lawns in residential areas, reducing use of water by golf courses. We can look at putting new reservoirs. We can look at how aquifer recovery could affect things. We could implement a Great Salt Lake conservation pool throughout reservoirs in the basin. We could look at reducing water use, on an annual basis by all water users by 1%, 25% or more. We can look at what could happen if the human population grows. What if it grows considerably? What if we implement a water reuse program where rather than discharging wastewater to the lake, that water is treated and reused upstream? What if we change the types of crops that are grown and increase the amount of water we import from the Colorado River? So you could come up with hundreds and hundreds of these and different combinations, and this is the kind of thing that we can look at and determine with water users what would be beneficial or helpful. So in summary, once the plan is completed, we'll be able, what we hope is that this plan will be developed in conjunction with water users and water interests, so that it can be a tool to actually communicate problems and challenges that water users have. So it's not all the time that you can get, everybody wins. But if we can understand challenges that some water users face, they may be able to reduce water use, or by getting an investment in some other area that would help. You can actually reduce water use, but also have a new reservoir. That's possible. There also may be water users who aren't willing to take cuts. They actually need more water in the future. Can they somehow compensate other water users who would use less? So by taking this large picture approach, we can start to see those types of trends. So, and it's valuable because by going through this process, we'll be able to get, actual numbers that can be used for planning communication. We can, anyway, there's a whole number of things, but eventually the idea is that we test these different ideas so that they're no longer just ideas, but that we can actually see what the impacts would be and come up with a plan so that we can avoid all the problems that we don't want to face in the future. And that's all I have. So I'm happy to take any questions about Great Salt Lake or the plan that we're working on.
Okay, any questions for Jake? So lucky today. Thank you very much.
I'm going on the tour, so it's more.
Oh, great.
We'll be around.
Great, thanks for sticking around. Okay, we are down to non-action items for discussion. Board members, does anybody have anything else they want to bring up during this work session?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I see that, our friend John Williams is here, and I was hoping he could tomorrow talk a little bit about the BPA view of the announcement of the Columbia River Treaty, particularly the flood measures effect on Idaho. Give you a little heads up, John.
You might not be a friend after tomorrow.
Okay, all right, John, is that okay? I mean, that's a request, but if that's outside of your comfort zone, that's okay too.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to touch upon it, but not go into detail on flood control because the details are still being worked out.
Yeah, that's what I was afraid of, John. Not that you're not afraid of them, you're afraid that we don't know what the details are.
I think our big concern is there's this big announcement that we've got an agreement for the treaty.
But nobody knows what.
But we've agreed to work it all out later, I guess. So but whatever you could share with us, would be appreciated. Okay, anybody, anything else? Okay, board members, I guess, and guests.
Board members and invited guests.
Are going across the hall to that dining area for lunch, and it may or may not be here.
It should be here.
Okay, I was told it would be here at 11:45. It's 11:46. So it's either here or will be here shortly.
Then after lunch, say 1 o'clock, we will convene out front for the field trip.
Lunch is here. Okay, yeah. All right, then we meet for the field trip at 1 o'clock.
Right at the front door.
Okay. All right. Okay, then with that, we will adjourn. We're just gonna adjourn. I don't. Yeah, we're just. Okay. I was gonna ask for a motion.
The chairman's prerogative.
We are adjourned from the work session. We'll convene for a field tour, and then tomorrow morning it's 8:30. Is that correct?
Yes.
8:30, we'll have an executive session. How long do we think that's gonna take?
Okay.
Half an hour. So for anybody who wants to come in, what? Okay, all right, we're gonna convene at 8:30, somewhere around 8:45 to 9 o'clock, we'll have our open session again. Okay, thank you.
We leave our